Okay. We'll be admitting participants in 10 seconds, just about the right time for them all to have logged in, hopefully, by 7:02. Okay. All right, that should do it. Hello. Welcome to our 2.1. Let me start with a little clarification. I got about a half a dozen emails from people from last night's class or this night's class thinking that there were two classes back to back and they had to take both nights. No, not 6 hours a week of art history for 3 units. It's just the one section. You're all in the Wednesday section because I know I sent the email only to those who are enrolled on the Wednesday night section. So I just want to make sure that's clear to everybody. If you choose, because of scheduling problems during the semester, to try and switch, I think you can't do that past about the middle of September, but you'll have to check with the Office of Records and Admissions. But you have that option as long as neither section's full. They're both close to full, but not quite yet. So if anyone wants to do that, please email me. Welcome all. I'm coming to you from my bedroom in Berkeley, California. How hot is it there? I mean, that's a corny question. At this point, it's cooled off here in Berkeley enough that I don't think I have to have two fans on. People said that was distracting last night, because it was about 10 degrees warmer in Berkeley. So I hope you're all reasonably comfortable. And last night things went fairly smooth, but I'll give you one little heads up. Somebody, right before we took our break, we'll take a break in each evening around 8:20 or so, about a 20-minute break. Someone logged in who I guess wasn't a student, because they just started laughing, or they had a laugh track going. It sounded like something out of a Joker in the Batman movies or something, kept going all the way through the break. When the break was over, it disappeared. So if that's the worst thing that happens all semester, we'll count our blessings. Just another heads up. The president, Dr. Chong, you may have seen his email. I think he sent it to students, not just to faculty. He did say that if there were any system interruptions that we couldn't repair, like in 2 minutes of trying, that hasn't happened to me except one time in a practice session, but last night it didn't. If that happens, power outages are possible, what have you, every kind of other unexpected thing could happen. The odds are slim. If it did happen more than once, I'd be surprised. If it happens, I will resend an invitation by email to the same, the portal, the faculty portal, to all of you within 5 minutes after that. And you would then have the option of re-logging into a new meeting and continuing where we left off. But if that doesn't work, backup plan B, I guess, or plan C would be, I am recording these lectures. You guys can see them on YouTube. I sent an email about it, but I'll keep doing that and reminding you during, by the Thursday, say 6 p.m., Thursday after, from each, one of the two lectures. They're the same lecture, so I'm only going to record one. Because of the laugh track last night, I'll be recording tonight's session and posting it on YouTube by 6 p.m. tomorrow. But really, if you don't participate in the live sections, that's going to be a small disadvantage to anyone who doesn't, because of the fact that that's your chance to ask questions and to clarify things that you obviously would miss. Also, live real time is when we're all supposed to be here. That's what we're getting. The college gets money from the state for. I get paid for doing it 7 to 10. And by the way, we won't go to 10 o'clock. That's quite late. 9:30 most nights. Maybe even earlier, sometimes 9:20, with a break in the middle, about 20 minutes. But I want to encourage you to ask questions. Last night, we had some really good ones coming from students at different points. So I'm not going to mute you guys unless it gets to be too distracting for all of us. If there's, sudden rush of, I doubt that, 5 questions and all at once or something. But since that's not likely, I want you to feel free to participate, to ask questions of anything about the course. What we just covered, the slide on the screen, some new information some of you will have that will help add information that we all benefit from, as long as it's relevant to this class. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of an overview. The course, I hope by now you should all have. Oh, by the way, a few people joined late. I know that. And I sent them emails. I tried to get them the attachments separately, individually, but most of you should have already gotten them last week when I put them in through by email. And these are three handouts. You should have these with you tonight, all three. We're going to start with the course policies and the grading methods. Then the next handout will be the syllabus. Well, that's something you should have with you every night. It's the template, it's the outline for the semester, and you will want to read what's on there. The reading assignments a week before each class, or sometime before the next class, are clearly stated there, as are all the deadlines for papers and the two-term test, I should say, sorry. There's a midterm and a final, and we'll get to how those work as we go. But I do want to start by reassuring you, neither test is a killer exam. For obvious reasons, they're going to be open book. So you guys have that advantage. This format has two advantages over live teaching. But I will say I've been teaching at Santa Rosa College live only. I never did. This is my first experience with online teaching, and it is for some of you too. I prefer that format, but what choice do we have? Someone let the pandemic door open back at the beginning of the year, and here we are. So my guess is next semester will be the same, and if we're lucky, fall of next year, we'll go back to it in person. But in the meantime, you do have an advantage as students, in a way, two advantages. I just mentioned one of them. The two tests, you're going to have probably 48 hours, I think I'll make it that long, where the information is there and you can take up to 2 days to answer your questions. I mean, if you do them in real time, the test lasts only an hour to an hour and a half. I allow up to an hour and a half. They're not killer exams. They're not 3-hour exams like some four-year colleges. When I took art history at Berkeley, that's what they were, 3-hour midterms and finals. Plus, the final is not cumulative. It does not ask you to go back and study everything you learned from the beginning of the semester. Once you finish the midterm, you're done with that material, and you can forget that or move on. So the two tests are separate, sections of the syllabus. It states that on the syllabus if you've looked at it. Okay, and then the other advantage for you as students to this format, Zoom lends itself pretty well to slide lectures. And that's the bulk of what we're going to be doing. And the pace is slower. I've cut down the number of slides, not drastically, but significantly for each section, each topic, from maybe 12 slides or 10 to maybe 8 in any given evening on average. For instance, ancient Egypt. I've been there, and you'll see my slides of Egypt if you care to stick around. I hope several of you will. After the slides from the syllabus, this will happen throughout the semester. I've traveled to over 40 countries. So at about, once every 2 or 3 weeks, there'll be a topic where I have my own slides and they're just for you to enjoy or to find interest in. There's no grading related to them, no note-taking. I'll state that before I begin that. We'll always be at the end of any given evening. So my slides of Egypt are the last like 20, 25 minutes. I'll show you what the Great Pyramid looks like up close, and the inside of King Tut's tomb and several other pharaohs' tombs in the Valley of Kings. Hopefully you'll find that interesting. So those are all easily digestible slides and about slide lectures with this format. I have to say I'm impressed. Zoom, I know it was designed in China, as I recall, that they thought about, college class formats, at least as part. I know they don't only, it's not only used for colleges, obviously, it's all kinds of things are now on Zoom, but it has a, I think, a flexible enough setup. If someone as technically challenged as I can, or technologically challenged, I should say, and believe me, I was way behind the curve. My daughter keeps saying, Papa, join the 21st century. She's 17. She's just starting her junior year online at Albany High School, near where we live in Berkeley. So my daughter and my wife are both much more tech savvy. So I do want to give a shout out. I believe in giving credit where it's due. I couldn't do what I'm doing as minimally, let's just say competent, I believe, as I might have gotten just enough to at least get better as we go. I will occasionally not look straight at the camera, and you'll see me, you know, look off to the side. Little things like that I don't think are going to make the course too difficult for any of you. But, you know, little rough edges will get smoothed out. The point is, I couldn't have learned how to do any of this if it weren't for two people. Michael Healy, some of you may know him. He's a long-term adjunct like I am, meaning not full-time, not tenure. He's had 4 years longer than me. I've taught here 24 years. Well, I was teaching in person, driving up from Berkeley. So there's one advantage. I don't have that commute this semester. And he's been teaching for 28 years. And he teaches astronomy. And one of my readers who helps me with the grading and other tasks that I've hired, she took a class from him, and she said, oh, he'll help you. And he did. And thank you. If you have thought about taking astronomy and you haven't decided what teacher, I can recommend him. I've heard nothing but good things about him. And the other person was my wife, who had to be tech savvy because she had to help our daughter when I was up in Santa Rosa all day teaching with her math. And my daughter luckily just passed a class that in person she was struggling in online to finish her junior math requirements. So sometimes this format has good qualities. And I believe in keeping the channels open, but let's just see how it goes. During the lecture, again, don't hesitate if you have a question. I don't need to see your face, so that doesn't disrupt us, because the screen, the way I'll have it, is full of these slides, so you can have the maximum size and clarity and detail on each slide while I give you the facts, the information that, of course, you'll need to take notes. But I can hear all of you if I don't mute all, and I didn't do that last night. We were fine. Okay, if you have joined the class late, email me, please, and you wouldn't have the syllabus, so then I'll have to tell you in case you don't have my email. I prefer you to email me for individual things, not the assignments, but individual questions on my AOL. That's the oldest I know. I've had the same AOL email address for 24 years before I started teaching in Santa Rosa. It's M-A-R-K, Mark, my first name, last initial, M-A-R-K-W at AOL.com. That's on the top of the syllabus and the course outlines if you have that. So in other words, if you're one of those people who didn't get a chance to print it out because you joined late, I will send to you those two tomorrow before 5 if you email me before 5 and ask me to send as attachments 3 handouts that the rest of you, most of you should have here tonight with you. We're about to go over the first one, course outlines, then will be the syllabus, and then last is terms to know. We will get after the break, we'll start slow. I always think, if you've never taken art history, most of you probably haven't, you will, appreciate that I don't hit you all at once with like 20 different terms or definitions or facts or slides to know. We'll start slow. We're going to cover 4 slides. Let's see, I always have trouble with that. 4 slides tonight after the break, and we'll probably end early. I've never gone to, I used to go to 10 and in-person classes when students had a lot of questions, but I usually manage to end around 9:45. I think tonight we can end closer to 9:30 and most nights. Okay, does anybody have any questions before we get started about anything that I've just said, or you're just joining the class? But I think I answered one of those main ones, which is if you don't have the syllabus, don't panic. You can take the notes. I will give you the titles of the slides. There's only 4. And then next class, you should have that printed out. Does anybody have any particularly urgent questions? Okay. Well, let's proceed. If you will all please take with you, or take out, if you should have with you, the course grading policies, or actually, as I worded it, grading and course policies. The required texts are available. I said this to all my classes. I resent how publishers rip students off on pricing of textbooks. It's outrageous, but we have no control. You may not know this, but if you know anybody who's had books published, I've had 5 books published. We authors, we do not set the prices of any of our books, fiction or nonfiction. Even if you're, a world famous author like Harry Potter series or something, you don't set the price of the books, and certainly textbook authors don't. I know that the hardbound edition of Stockstead is expensive. The loose leaf edition new isn't much cheaper, if any. but used loose leaf editions are available. At least they were the last time I checked last week when I was emailing with students who had this question. You know, probably on Amazon, but you might have to search the internet. But you do need it. Why do you need a Stockstead Volume 1 only for this class? Or, you know, any textbook at all? Because I'll go ahead and tell you off the bat, most of what you need to use, the notes you need to use to study for the 2 exams are from the lectures. Another reason why you want to not miss any lectures. And if you're too sick for one or you're out of town, make sure you try to find that on YouTube and take notes. Because I'm going to test you on what we cover in class. Why? Because the textbook can't be as thorough and as in-depth as our lectures. Otherwise, we just give you the textbook and you could just take tests at home online, yeah, or have a robot do it. So the textbook has, though, 2 purposes that you need it for. First, it gives you context, the background as to where these slides came from, what, you know, the culture and the setting for the time and history when they were created, and the images you can look at while you prepare. So read, please, ahead, keep ahead of the reading, you know, where you've read the topic covered as it's covered for, let's say, Art of Ancient Egypt, the week before that lecture. So you'll have some familiarity when we start the lecture. And the other purpose is to study for the 2 tests, because 90% of the slides that you're going to see from this class, the slide lectures, are in Stockstead. It depends on which editions you have. The few that aren't, you can easily Google them if you choose to do that. But since the tests are open book, I don't think you necessarily need to make flashcards. That's what people would do in my in-person classes if they want to get an A. That was what I was told. But this is a lot less stressful for all of you when it comes to the actual tests. But anyway, it helps you to study and get context. And it's a very well-written, very inclusive textbook. The other one is by a friend and mentor who actually hired, no, she didn't hire me, she invited me to interview for this job 24 years ago, Sarah Gill. And she's retired now, living in Berkeley, not far from where I am. But she's a very well-respected art historian. She got her PhD at Columbia, and her book, The Critic Sees, is paperback, so it's less expensive than any hardbound or loose-leaf main textbook. But it's very good. I recommended it even for some of my friends who are not students but want to know more about how do you look at a work of art and understand how the artist created it. How do you understand the techniques that the artist used and how to write about that art? Because in this class, you'll have 2 papers. So let's get to that right below where, you know, I just mentioned the 2 textbooks. That should be something you already knew from my emails. You do need them if you don't have them yet by next week, if it's all possible. But there are 2 assignments for 4 assignments, 2 each of papers, short papers. When I say short, I want you to know I don't want 10 pages and not even 8. 7 is even pushing it. 2 to 5 pages is enough to get an A in this class if you do the papers the proper way. And I will send you as an attachment so you can open and see for yourself an A paper from a recent student who gave me permission, of course, to do that as a sample of what you should look like. Plus, we'll go over in detail in class. It's on the syllabus, the 3rd week, how to write your papers. They're not that difficult. You do have to do some research. They should be interesting, even fun for many of you if you're interested in art, because they're going to be your choice. You don't have to limit yourselves to what topics you want to write about. Any one work of art except your own, because that would be cheating. Surely you know the meaning of your own art. Many of you are, I'm sure, talented artists in your own right. So that's the only limitation. Anything other than your own artwork, it'd even be a family member, a significant other, what have you, a friend. But preferably it's something where there's research, because you do have to do some research, like, you know, an established artist who's got a record of some kind. And it could be a contemporary one. It could be someone local. Anybody ever hear of the movie Big Eyes? No, okay. It was pretty popular about 7 or 8 years ago. It's about Margaret Keane. She created the images. You've seen them. I'll bet you if you've seen any of the corny images of kids with gigantic eyes looking sad, like they're about to cry, in posters and prints on people's walls and kitchens and for decades, she's made money off of these. She started that idea. Her husband stole the idea from her, lied, and tried to convince everyone when she finally called him on it that she was crazy. So the movie's about how she took back her right. She was my first guest speaker in my first class I ever taught, my first semester at the Petaluma campus. Fascinating woman. She lives in Petaluma. Well, she did. She might have moved somewhere else in Marin County. You could interview her, Margaret Keane, Keane. Pretty well-known artist. If you look her up, you'll see. So you could write about one of her works of art, and one source of research could be, we'll talk about how to research when we get in 2 weeks from tonight to that topic. But just as a heads up, it doesn't have to be only textbook or online research. You can interview with the artists if they're live by email or over the phone or in person, and you can also go to museum websites and print out one of their brochures, because now we can go to museums in person, obviously. But there are so many ways. You can use documentaries about that artist or that type of artwork. So there's a lot of flexibility. The point is to pick a work of art for these 2 papers. One will be, you have 6 weeks from now, the 7th week, you got plenty of time, so you don't have to start worrying about it for a while or even think about it. But I would say 3 or 4 weeks from now, you should start thinking about what topic you want to write about. And then pick a topic that excites you, that interests you, that motivates you, that inspires you. Any work of art that you can get really interested enough in to want to know more about. It could be something you already know about, but of course you do have to have original research. And then 2 tests. They're all equally weighted, as you can see from the course outline. I don't believe in the system they had at UC Berkeley. I hated this, where the final counted a third or even half your grade. So if you bombed that test, you blew the whole semester. Even if you got A's on the midterm and papers or quizzes, I never thought that was fair. So people do sometimes have bad test days, although again, here this semester, you guys don't have too much chance of having a bad test day because you're going to have 48 hours to complete your exams at home. But in any case, yeah, they don't, these 4 components, 2 papers and 2 exams, are equally weighted, okay? And I grade on a straight percentage basis. I don't believe in the curve system, and most art historians I know of, at least at this college, do that as well. So in other words, 90% to 100 is an A. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. 80 to 89 a B, 70 to 79 a C, and 60 to 69 a D. Now, what if you're taking a pass, not pass? This is my role. This is the district's. You need to get 70% of the total potential points, which is 280 points. But I'll go ahead and tell you, a number of people have done that every semester before the final. They don't have to take the final. They're done if they don't, unless they want to. I had 2 or 3 students actually choose to take the final when they didn't need to in a pass, not pass category. So if you're one of those people, of course, it should show up on the roster, but you should also send me an email or even talk to me during class like this, just as a reminder, and I can tell you how many points you have. That's true for all of you. Any point during the class after the first paper has been graded. Not yet. We don't have any points today or next week, but by the middle of the semester, I can tell you where you stand as far as your grades, how many points you have, and what number of points you need to get the grade you want in this class. Okay, so let's pause to catch our breaths. And are there any questions about anything I just covered? I do see people wanting to join. Uh-oh, I almost forgot. I always have to do that because there are, here we go. Okay. Admit, yeah, there we go. Okay, admit all. Wait a minute, where did that go? Message, one person is waiting. Well, yeah, this usually is smooth where you just say admit all, but anyway, that person should be here. I hope that worked. It did last night. Yeah, it looks like the next person joined us, I hope. Yeah, I have to keep doing that. Check at the bottom of my screen for someone waiting to be admitted. All right, if someone just joined us, welcome. We just covered, which you already should have with you now, the basic parameters of the grading components of the 4 elements of papers, 2 papers and 2 exams. Attendance, this is important. This is going to be something I think you'll get right away. You'll get, I hope, really interested in doing, and it benefits both you and me. At the break, I'm going to ask you to, I'll repeat this, so you don't have to write it down now unless you want to. Do a mini bio, I call it. So taking the role this way on this, with grid screens in a remote setting it's not really very efficient. So other teachers, including Michael Healy, who recommended I do this, he does in all his classes, suggested having students do an initial assignment. Well, I'm not going to grade you on this, so there's no pressure. I'm just going to ask you to write 2 paragraphs about yourself, your background. 1 paragraph about where you've lived, traveled, and worked, and another about your professional, or let's say art, anything related to art. If you have a skill, if you're experienced, or you're studying art, or you're practicing, or you want to become some kind of creative person. And if you don't, that's fine. I don't know how to draw or paint or sculpt. My parents were both artists. They were equally talented at drawing, painting, and sculpture. I didn't get those genes. I can write, but I just appreciate art, as many of you do. So if you have no background in art, that's okay, because you should end, all of you, with 1 line is enough, 1 sentence. What do you want to learn from this class within the context of ancient art? Well, it's prehistoric, ancient, and medieval art. You can see from the syllabus. Obviously, we're not covering Impressionism. That's for another class. I teach that class too, Art 2.3, 2.2, 1.2. So when the break starts, we'll have a 20-minute break around 8:20. I'll remind you of that. And during the break, it'd be a good idea to do that and then email it to me. And I will restate my email address a few times each of those nights when it's relevant, in case you don't have it, obviously, right in front of you, or you didn't get the syllabus yet. The one I'd prefer you to send to is my AOL, because it's much quicker for me to access it for various reasons, and download and open and read your, I call it mini bio. You need to put your full name, please, not just your first, and not just your email handle. I don't know what, I get butt cheeks 04. Literally, I got one today. I'm supposed to guess who that person is. No, not going to do that. So I sent them back an email saying, I can't count you as being enrolled in the class. That's how I'm taking attendance. Just the first week, and the second week, I won't do it again. But if anyone didn't send that to me, I will send you an email and tell you live, hey, I have a few people that didn't send in their mini bios. That's how I'm going to count you as enrolled. And then no more roll tape. This is not high school. We're not going to do roll every night. That's just too much distraction. So I will ask you to do those if you can by the end of the class tonight, and email them to me at Mark MA. I'll say it again, this is my AOL email, and I can access it from more places than the campus email. Mark, MARKW @AOL.com. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so I'll restate that when we get to the break. Moving on now to office hours. I don't need to go over that, right? They're on this handout. The main thing is that you can email me at any time, but give me up to 24 hours to respond, or if it's on a weekend, 48. And I will get back to you usually the later that same day or the next day. And then the other thing is my voicemail, and that's on here too. I'm not going to restate it. And that's 24 hours. You can call me if you have an urgent question before the exam or before the end of the semester, about your grade or whatever urgent thing, and don't worry about waking me up at 5 in the morning or 2 a.m. It's 24 hours voicemail, and it just beeps me, and I can check it whenever I have a chance, and you'll get a call back if you give me a number to respond. Okay, now let's talk about extra credit. This is where I hope a lot, in fact, I know from years and years of teaching, a lot of you are going to raise your grade, 1 whole letter grade, from what it might otherwise be, depending on how well you do on your papers and the exams, by doing all the extra credit options. So the point being that there are up to 50 points extra credit available for everybody. There's no advantage or disadvantages to students who choose one or other option over a different. You can do any combination of these 4 options, and I'm going to go over them now together with you. So the bottom line is that I had one student once who filed, it wasn't really a complaint, it was something like that, and a question with the dean, and the dean looked at my syllabus and said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you just add a sentence, and it's down here. On the second page, we have, note, all students have an equal opportunity to earn up to 50 points extra credit by choosing which of the above credit options they want to pursue. You don't have to do any of them to get an A if you're already earning one. But if you choose that, the maximum is the same for everybody. It's 50 points. There's no uneven playing field. There's no advantages or disadvantage. Level playing field is a phrase that we like to use at the college. So if you have any questions, of course, you can always email me. All right, so what are the extra credit options? Well, the first one I had a minor typo. It wasn't a typo. I should have changed, and I didn't. One word, only because of the pandemic, which I forgot to do. So if you've got this in front of you, hopefully everybody right now, option number 1 on the second page, extra credit. Here we go. It's going to an architectural site and taking 4 color photos of the exterior. Why is that important? It isn't easy during a pandemic to get permission to go inside any buildings, and I don't want you to risk anything. So you just cross out the word interior. That was how I had it before, of course, before the shutdowns occurred. So it's exterior photos. So in other words, you take, well, your phone or whatever, a camera, and you go out and find a building that's interesting. It could be any kind of architecture, except please don't give me Costco outlets or, CVS pharmacy front and things like that. Obviously, it should be interesting enough to have 4 different views or details, architectural features or details that you can take different views of. Best would be to take one full view of the whole exterior of the front of the building. Probably that's the simplest, and then details of 3 other shots. So give me 4 color photos on the exterior of any building. List the name of the building and the location. That's all you have to write, plus your name and what class. I have 2 sections. I've already covered that, so I don't want to mix them up, and they're both nearly full, so I don't want to have to go through 85, 90 names and try to guess which class you're in. So please remember to say, Tuesday or Wednesday are 2.1, whichever. Obviously tonight it's Wednesday, and then just email me those, or if you prefer, you can mail them to me hard copy. Some people said they prefer that for whatever reason. There's my mailing address. You see it here in Berkeley, zip code and all. If you do that, each time you do give me 4 color photos of the exterior of any building and write all the information on there or attach it, in the same email with the attachment, you get 10 points. That's meant to get you out there looking at architecture as an art form. Architecture is my strength. I got my master's degree from Cal State. It's now Cal State East Bay. It was Cal State Hayward. Back when a man who won the Pulitzer Prize, I'm pretty proud to say this, he was my thesis advisor. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his architectural criticisms. His textbooks are in libraries and universities all over the world. He was an expert mostly on 19th and 20th century American architecture. That's what I got my master's in. I don't have a PhD, so you don't have to call me professor if you don't want, technically. I'm just the teacher, and you can call me Mr. Wilson if you prefer. Okay, but the point is that the master's degree I have qualified me to teach these classes. So that's part of the mini bio that I'll be getting into in a few minutes when we get to the next segment of this introduction. But let's go over the remaining extra credit options and then see if anybody has any questions about any of them. And at any point, you can interrupt me if you do. Okay, you can email me either, an attachment or mail and a hard copy, either one, of any article relating to art, the visual art. So this class is not about dance or performance art. So it has to be, painting, sculpture, photography, all right, drawing, or architecture. Those are the 5 mediums or types of visual art that we're studying in this class. And not photography, of course, but photography could be something you can write about for your papers or for extra credit. So, for instance, today I got several articles from my Tuesday night class already. One was about a painting by Pissarro. Some of you have heard of him. Maybe if you know, he's one of the most famous of all the Impressionists. He was the one that was there at the beginning, and he continued to be an Impressionist after the turn of the last century, not this century, but the previous one. For like decades, he was a famous Impressionist. And there's a painting worth $30 million of his that was stolen by the Nazis, and it's hanging in a museum in Madrid. And that museum not only won't give it back to the descendants of the family that owned it, because they're dead. They died in the concentration camps, as you might imagine. And they proved it, that it was theirs. They had the documents. But they won't even compensate them for it. I find that despicable, but that's a matter of, whatever opinions you might have. That could make an interesting topic, because there was an article about it on in the internet. I think it was not just AOL, but it might have cropped up on any art website. You print that out and mail it to me, or most of you won't want to do that. Just send me the attachment and you get 5 points. for each article that you submit relating to the subjects of any of the visual arts. Okay, so that's option number 2. Number 3, this I just added because of the pandemic, the shutdown. Watch a feature-length film or documentary about the life of an artist. Any artist. It doesn't have to be someone from the period of this class that we're covering. And then what does it have to be? What do I mean by feature length? At least 60 minutes. That's a pretty reasonable minimum. And how I know you actually did that, I'm asked you to write a 2-page, no grading for composition or grammar or spelling, 2-page description of what you learned about that artist's life and work. I'll give you 2 examples. Last semester, students did this. I actually started doing it right after the spring break last year when we all had to stay home. Frida. I hope some of you have heard of it. It's a movie about the life of Frida Kahlo. If you don't know who she is, I assume most of you have heard of her. There was going to be an exhibit of hers at the San Francisco the Young Museum, and they couldn't do it because of or maybe it was the Legion of Honor. It was about to open the week the pandemic shutdown happened. So those paintings were just kept in crates, sadly, and shipped back to wherever they were originally from. But you can see the movie Frida. That's the name of the movie, with Selma Hayek. A brilliant movie, one of the best movies about the life of an artist and the history of what she lived through, the Depression, communism, rebellion in Mexico. Of course, you probably know she was Mexican, and her development for style and her stormy, to put it mildly, stormy relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera, of course, one of the most famous painters of the last 120 years. He was 25 years older than her and married at the time they met. But somehow they managed to stay, they divorced and then got remarried, but mostly they were together for the entire time after they met, and they really loved each other. But the movie's about everything from her life to her art to the historic times and the differences in the cultures between Mexico, France, the US, where they lived and worked all over the world. It's a great movie, Freedom. And another one is about Vincent van Gogh. There are so many movies about him that would be easy to find, but I can recommend one in particular. I was raised on it. My parents were Van Gogh fans from way back before most people knew more about Van Gogh than the myth. And it is a myth. We're going to talk about him tonight after the break. We're going to look at one of his slides. You see it's on the syllabus. There's a myth about him cutting his ear off. You might assume that's true. It's partly true, but mostly false. I'll explain that when we get to that slide. So anyway, that would be a good example of something that you could easily go ahead and look up any movie, but I would recommend the one called Lust for Life, 3 words, with, of all things, Kirk Douglas portraying Van Gogh. And you might think, if you know anything about Kirk Douglas, he was known as a strong arm or gangster type actor. What's he doing playing a sensitive man like Van Gogh? Oh, he knocked that role out of the ballpark. He was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor and should have gotten it for that year. Anyway, there's so many out there and so many documentaries. It should be easy to do that. Okay, last option. I know I have it listed as number 6, so I apologize. That's another minor typo I didn't catch. There were 6 options. The 2 I had to cut out were attending a lecture that I usually give one every 2 or 3 months for different heritage groups on architecture around the Bay Area. Not now. And then the other was a walking tour of architecture in Berkeley, where we go inside some really beautiful historic homes that aren't open to the public. Lots of interesting things you see you would never have a chance. Can't do that. So those are out. So I forgot to change the number. So number 4, not number 6. Downloading either of my 2 novels, and I should have said my 2 novels, on Amazon Kindle. Now this one I vetted, I want everyone to know this, with the administration, the head of the English department, the head of the art department, and the dean, plus the president of the college and the head of whatever it is that reviews things, to make sure these were reasonably appropriate and related to the topics we're covering in this class, and they are. So you could ignore both of these and not even think about them, or you can consider looking at them with the free preview that Amazon Kindle has. I think all of you know that you can look at the first, I think it's 35 pages of any book, fiction or nonfiction, that's on their website, their ebooks, and read those first few pages or several pages and decide whether you're interested or not. But for this extra credit option, you would need to download either one of those 2 novels and show me a screenshot of the last chapter or the order, your order, which of course will be on record if you do choose to do that. And if you do that for either of these novels, you get 15 points. Whether you read them or not, I assume it's something that you will decide later. Some of you will be too busy this semester. But if you do read either of them and you choose to write a review, whatever you care to say, good, bad, or in between, you will get 10 points if you post a review. And it doesn't have to be 2 paragraphs. It could be 2 sentences on Amazon. So that's up to 25 points. Right there's half your extra credit options. The titles are right here, but for those that don't have the syllabus in front of them or the course policies handout, I'll just briefly state them. The first one is about growing up in Chicago in the early 60s. Yes, I can remember Kennedy was president. There was something some of you studied in your history classes, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost brought the world to a halt. I mean, quite literally, at any moment, we could have had nuclear holocaust. Luckily, we had a president who had a calm, rational, diplomatic approach, strong and firm, but rational. We dodged a bullet. The world dodged a bullet, and I grew up with remembering that. I was in grade school at the time. But the characters in this novel are a little bit older than I was, and they come from all the different cultural backgrounds that the South Side of Chicago still has. Some of you know that's Obama's old neighborhood. When I grew up there, it was very heavily immigrant oriented because people come from all over the world, because Chicago was still then, at that time, the second largest city in the United States. It is now not that quite, it's LA now. Anyway, it's about that period in history, but it's also about a family of artists, based on my own, of course, a fictional family of artists, and struggling with what it means to try and be a freelance artist and support a family of 6, like my father did, and many other people have over the years. So it got really good reviews. It has over 48 reviews on Amazon. And if you choose to add one, that's worth 10 points. If you just download it, that's 15. The other one is a little more current, but actually historic to most of you. The Open House Murders, an offbeat San Francisco thriller set in 1991. This is an architecturally oriented book. It's about the sites all over the Bay Area, like the Palace of Fine Arts and Hearst Castle and other, well, actually not the Bay Area, but I should say the Julia Morgan designed sites. And who was Julia Morgan? I'm going to get to that in a minute. The first woman architect, I'll just say it, in the history of the United States. She did buildings all over the US, but mostly in California. So in that novel, I was a real estate agent for many years before I became an art history professor. And so I saw how people would act sometimes really crazy over real estate deals. But no one ever actually left a dead body in any of my open houses. However, that's the theme of this. So it's obviously a completely, fictional account of the early 90s when there was no internet, and the Russian mafia, which was already just starting to make its inroads. And it's around even now in the US, before Putin and all that. So early days of the Russian mafia in the Bay Area. And all of the sites in it are ones you can go take photographs of, with the details of how to find them, where they are, and what's there. There's like 24 different historic sites throughout the novel. So either one of those is extra credit options and worth, again, up to 25 points if you both download and review either one. Okay, any questions about anything I've covered about extra credit? None yet? Okay, that's fine. So we're going to proceed to, well, a late policy, I should summarize. I'm very flexible. In fact, I've been told by other teachers I'm too flexible with this, too lenient. I allow you to turn papers in as late as the week before the final, late papers. But the trouble with that is, if you do that to yourself, you're backing yourself in a corner. I've had students wait till the last week of class before the exams to turn in both papers and then try to study for the exam. It almost always leads to not as good a grade as you would otherwise have. It's just too much pressure. Not to mention you have other classes that same week, of course, most of you do, that you need to study for as well. So my cutoff is the week before the exam. I'll repeat this, it's on the syllabus. And if you turn it in a week or more late in any, either of the 2 papers or, well, that's it. The exams have a cutoff. 48 hours after the exam is posted, I won't accept it unless you have a medical emergency, and you'll have to verify that with, written. This is not my policy, this is the district's. Medical or family emergency needs to have written evidence. I put this here in the late policy, so we'll just wrap this up and say, I'm reasonable. I mean, obviously things happen, But if you weren't available for the time the exam was on, I can repost it for you, but only if you have shown me written evidence that I then am supposed to check in with the dean or the department chair, I meant to say, about to make sure that it meets the requirements, in which case then you would have a makeup. The papers, you don't need to worry about makeups. They are what they are, and you can do them later than the deadline, but I don't recommend it because you get yourself behind in this class if you do that. But I will accept them up to the week before the exam, and it's only 10 points off out of 100. Make that up with extra credit. Okay, any questions at all about grading? All right, so we'll take a deep breath, and I'm going to say what we're going to do now. If you look at the syllabus, I do want to tell you, we're not meeting the week of the election. I think some of you have already figured out, if you looked at the syllabus, what my point of doing that is. I'm not going to get partisan. It's not appropriate here in an art history class. You might be able to guess my perspective on the current political situation, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to say it is pretty important for people to vote. Maybe more so this year than it ever has, but in any case, it isn't something people should just take lightly. Of course, if you don't vote, it's not going to affect your grade in this class. I'll have no way of knowing. That's your business. But I am taking that week off, and I hope many of you will use the time to do one of three things. Vote in person, vote by mail, make sure you do whatever, either way, in time to get the ballots in before the deadlines. Of course, now they're saying a week minimum before the actual date of the election if you're mailing your ballot in. Assuming no more postal boxes and post offices get shut. But anyway, that's one thing. The other is, besides voting, is you might want to help out. I know most people won't. I've done it. My daughter wants to when she gets old enough. She can't. She's not 18 yet. She's 17. I know, in a pandemic, why would you do that? But it's social distancing, at least in the Berkeley post office, it's a school, where they have in-person voting in my neighborhood. I did it when the pandemic, right? In March, it was already here. And they were extremely conscientious, and no one who voted that day in my neighborhood got sick. So you can do it in person, or you can even volunteer to help. And then last but not least is just see what happens. It's not going to be probably the night of the election that, if we're lucky, maybe we'll know who won and what, not just the president, but all the other races, the Senate campaigns around the country, and the House of Representatives, different initiatives. There's a lot of important things on the ballot, ballots, I should say, around the country. So I think it's reasonable to take 2 nights off. So that gives us a break, right? At the beginning of November, about a little more than halfway through the class. We don't have a spring break in the fall, so that's the closest thing to it. Okay, so we're going to get to some slides after the break, but before we do that, I'm going to tell you something about, say about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll probably see what time it is. We might take our break a little early. You don't have to take notes on this at this point, but you see that on the syllabus, I discuss, or say we will discuss, what is art, quote unquote. Well, that is such a personal topic to most people. Each person's definition of art, is your own, and maybe you haven't thought about it because you've never studied art and had no reason to before you took this class. I'm not going to ask you to write a definition of art unless you choose to. You could add that to your mini bios as one more sentence, but I'm not asking you to do that because that's more of an esoteric judgment thing with each individual. There is no set definition of art. There can't be. There's many definitions as there are people, one person said in one of my classes. That's pretty close to the truth. So what we are going to talk about is the controversy around an exhibit. You could look it up for extra credit. You could print out an article, or even 2. There's more than one about this controversy. It occurred in 2000. I know that's ancient history to some of you, but turn of this century, and it involved 2 very famous people, both of whom are still in the news recently. Were in the news recently. One is Rudolph Giuliani. Now, I had some student last night who never heard of him say, who was she? Now, he was the mayor of New York City at the time the 9/11 attacks occurred. And this is a year before that, right? Before 9/11. He was been mayor of New York and fairly popular. He was a Republican. And when this exhibit occurred, it's called Sensation. If you want to look it up, you could just look it up that way. Art exhibit sensation, or sensation art exhibit controversy. I'm sure if you Google it, you get plenty of articles. 2000. It started in London, the exhibit, earlier that year. Actually, I was thinking 99 it opened. It was a British arts scene exhibit. It was all the latest cutting edge art from Britain. It came to New York, and it came to a small museum. And that was part of what the controversy was about. It was a city-owned museum. And New York's so big. If you've never been there, sometime you should go. It's an amazing city. Even LA doesn't compare. New York has 21 million people in the metropolitan area. It's one of the 10 largest cities on earth, of course. So in one neighborhood, it's called Brooklyn. You might have heard of it. There are movies about it. Spike Lee even made a movie, but it's now gentrified, but it wasn't back then, at least this area. It was a working class area with a museum run by the city, paid for by taxes. Half of the budget came from the city. It's an important detail as to what the controversy was about. Were paid by city taxpayers, and Giuliani was the mayor of the city, and so he had some authority over the museums and their budgets. But he wasn't thinking about art when this exhibit arrived. It had all these controversial works, but I'll only talk about two of them. The ones that he got upset about enough to try and close the museum. That's pretty serious. When you get to that level, that some people would call censorship. Why was he mad at this museum in this sensation exhibit in 2000? Because in that exhibit, two works offended him. First was one called, the Black Madonna. That's the nickname that the media, the newspapers give it. Is really called Holy Virgin Mary by Chris O'Feely, one of my favorite artists. His work is in museums here in the Bay Area, which you can't see now, but eventually you could. In the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, there's two of his paintings. He's Nigerian. He's of British heritage, speaks English, raised, there's an important detail, as a Catholic, as a Christian, moved with his parents when he was 10 to London. He created this image of the mother of Jesus, right? Mary, that mother, that Mary, right? So-called Holy Virgin in the Bible, that she was, or by the Catholic Church, I should say. She was in this painting wearing blue robes. That's not controversial. She happened to be Black. That's not controversial. Not in New York City. No, that wasn't the issue. But on her robes were dried pieces of elephant dung glued to her robes from real elephants that had left those things behind in probably Nigeria. In fact, it was Nigeria. And Giuliani, said that's an insult to all devout Christians, and particularly Catholics that revere Mary, Mother of Jesus. That's not appropriate in a museum supported by the public and taxpayers' money. Take it out. The museum refused to do that. So what happened with that piece, the controversy died down quickly, unlike the second one, which I'll get to in just 1 minute. What happened is Chris O'Feely heard about the controversy. He was in London, so I think he flew to New York, or did it, maybe it was on an interview on camera from his home or his studio. He answered the rejection this way. He said, I'm from a culture where elephant dung is used in traditional folk art to represent the cycle of life from, birth and death and decay through rebirth. And that's what the whole story supposedly, right? Of course, if you believe in that, is about Jesus, his life, right? And what he said about when he died, how, people could live after death and go to heaven. He said, I'm not disrespecting her. You just don't understand my cultural background. And it turns out that there was plenty of evidence to prove what he said was true. And so Giuliani finally backed off. The one, though, that not just him and his city hall officials, but many other people throughout New York were more upset by was called child molester. That one, even I would have objected to, and I don't consider myself a person in favor of censorship. It was a giant pixelated image, about 10 feet tall, painted onto one wall, of a convicted child molester from London, a woman who had kidnapped and tortured, sexually abused, and then to death, literally killed several children, and didn't deny it. She was convicted in court, confessed, and they don't have capital punishment in England, so she was still alive. And as she was let out of the courtroom, she looked directly at one of the newspaper cameramen and gave a smirk, like she had no remorse, in other words. So her expression with the smirk on her face was composed, get this now, of dozens of little dots of ink, which were, when you got up close, you could see there were the faces of dozens of children who had been murdered throughout the British Isles over the last 50 years. And their parents, when nobody else in their family was ever asked if they would allow that, and you can imagine they would have objected. The artist just decided to expropriate their images and use them for his work. That caused controversy in London when the exhibit opened, and here it caused even more because Giuliani, being as he was, a conservative, culturally conservative mayor, decided that that was so outrageous that that meant the whole exhibit, either they had to take that work out. He backed off on the one about Virgin Mary, but not this one. So he threatened to remove the funding of the museum if they didn't take that out. And his main objection was, besides the work itself, hey, little kids are coming home from school. There was a grade school right up the street. And they're up to, some of them are kindergartners, 5 years old. They walk into the museum and their older siblings or classmates are scaring them to death. This is not an exaggeration. This was happening. It was on the news in New York. And they would say, hey, come here, to a little 5-year or 6-year-old from their, kindergarten class in that same school. After school, these kids, their parents weren't home. Of course, it's a working class neighborhood. Some of you know latchkey, what that phrase means. These were latchkey kids. There was no child care program. This was a working class neighborhood. So they'd come home and maybe their older sibling might try to keep an eye on them, or they'd have perhaps a housekeeper or a family relative at the apartment. So they'd come home on their own as, as students from the grade school. And some of them were being coaxed into coming into the museum and looking at that giant murderous image. And the older kids would make fun of them and say, look, that's what's going to happen to you. This woman's going to come, or someone like her, and in your bedroom window at night, scaring the kids, giving them nightmares, making parents angry. There were pickets outside the museum, and they weren't just, people from the mayor's office or his own party. So it got major national news, that particular work. So what finally happened is Hillary Clinton was the other famous person. She was running against Giuliani for the Senate seat, which she did win, as you may have heard, before she became Secretary of State, and then lost when she ran for president. That Hillary Clinton, she was not in favor of what she called is censorship after the fact. She said, look, the mayor, to him and the whole city government, because they were run by him, by Giuliani, the current mayor, you can't do that. It's bad enough that you're objecting to one work of art in a museum because you don't personally like it, or whatever, anybody else. That's censorship. But especially once it's already on display and you didn't object before. The museum had open public hearings, and they did. Before each exhibit, the city charter of a museum run by the city had to tell the public, make an announcement. However, back then it was probably email already, and posters saying tonight there will be a meeting to discuss an upcoming exhibit. And people could have objected, and Giuliani didn't attend. Neither did he send anybody from City Hall, and he could have, even though he was busy as mayor. So that's what happened. In the end, to get to the bottom line on this controversy, the state Supreme Court of New York made a ruling, and they said this. First, they said to Giuliani, get off the museum's back off. You have no right to censor a work of art because you don't personally like it, or even you and the people you think you represent do. If the museum had followed all the rules, which they did, they have every right to put any work of art on display they want to. And you could have objected beforehand. That's censorship. That's against the freedom of speech we have in the Constitution. But then they said to the museum, but you also have a responsibility to the public in your neighborhood. And what does that mean? That means that you have to have age standards. These little kids coming in off the street with no limitations and no control can just wander into the exhibit or be dragged in by their older siblings. That's not appropriate, because parents have a right to expect their children to feel safe when they go into a museum and not be scared to death. So they said you can continue the exhibit without taking any of the objects out of it if you partition it and you have an entrance with someone like a security person from the museum or a docent standing at the entrance, making sure no one under the age of 18, that's the legal definition of an adult in the state of New York. I think here in California, isn't it 21? I can't remember. But anyway, in New York at that time, I think it still is, it's 18 for all things. So anyone over 18 can see it. Anyone under 18 must be accompanied by an adult. Simple solution. I think they got it right. The museum continued the exhibit. It didn't get closed, shut down. Giuliani couldn't cut their budget. He was going to cut half their budget. If he just yanked the rug out from under them, they'd have had to close half the year, the following year. So none of their budget was cut. Last, who won out in that? It's hard to say. In terms of the politics, you can't really say for sure, although Giuliani dropped out of that Senate race before the election when Hillary won that seat. That the point is that the museum in the end, that museum and art, I would say art in general, came out ahead, by which I mean 500% increase in their membership and their donations and fees from the public. That's how much this controversy helped that museum. So art won in the end. Okay, so we are going to look at slides, and I'm going to tell you how to look at them after the break. But I would like you to have before, and then I'll repeat it. We'll take a break in about 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes. Let's see. First of all, any questions anybody had about any of that? If you're a parent or any of you have younger siblings, I would imagine you'd have some thoughts about, for instance, you know, you could choose if you want to express those in your mini bios or find an article about that. You don't have to write about the articles you send me. You get 5 points just for submitting them. If you choose to write about them, I'll give you 10 points, you know, like a half a page or a page of your opinion about that topic in the article that you found. If you choose to do that, I've already done that with 2 students from last night. So that is just your option. Just sending me the article by itself with your name and the class, of course, is worth 5 points. If you choose to write, well, it should be a page to get the extra 5 points. That's reasonable. But tonight, there's no points or grade related effect of writing these mini bios. But what I am asking you to do is to think about what you want to learn from this class. What is it within the subject matter that goes all the way from prehistoric cultures and, you know, cave paintings and Stonehenge, all the way up through Gothic cathedrals like Notre Dame, which almost burnt down just last year. But luckily, it was saved, I think. Anyway, the point is there's so many topics within the syllabus that you can think about just for a few minutes. You don't have to write this during the break, but that's a convenient way to do it, because then if you will email it to me before we finish or right after we finish tonight, I'm going to check all my emails tomorrow. I do ask you to try and get them to me by say 3 or at the latest 4. Let's say 4 tomorrow afternoon, because I don't like being online after 5 o'clock unless it's for this. My daughter's, you know, among other reasons, is always wanting something to do during dinner and or play games. You know, we've been locked in. I'm sure you all know what that's like if you have kids at home or younger siblings. So I kind of not want to go out to my studio. It's not in my house, my computer. This laptop is my daughter's. She loaned it to me for this purpose. So please try to get them to me well before 5. If you don't do it tonight, I'll repeat it again if you didn't write it down before. My personal email is best. Now, if you happen to send it to the campus email, that's also on the syllabus. I'll still give you credit. It's just easier for me to open them and read them on my personal email. That's Mark, MARKW at AOL.com. And again, what I'm asking you to write is 3 things. It could be 4, but 3 minimum. And please keep it to no more than 3 paragraphs, half a page to 2/3 at most, not even a full page. That's more than you need to write. So the first one would be your professional and personal background, meaning where have you lived and traveled, anywhere outside the Bay Area, obviously, and where have you worked, right? And your educational, those 3 things. And that first paragraph, I assume, will be the longer if you do 2 separate paragraphs. So it's your background in, you know, work, education, and travel. Well, you know, lived or traveled outside the Bay Area. So put that into the first half or first part. Okay. The second part would be any experience you have with art. If you're not yourself a talented artist, then of course you still might have some experience or opinions about art, or you know, exposure to art in some way anytime during your life. So that would be the second paragraph, and that might not be that long for some of you, but if you're a talented artist, you can write you know, however you want to put it, something about your skills. And then if you, by the way, if you are an experienced artist, or even just starting out and feel comfortable about one of the work of art of your own that you like, if you send me an attachment, you get 5 points just for the image of that painting or object. Maybe it's a piece of sculpture you created in the three-dimensional art classes. My daughter really loved that class. She took it last year before they shut down at Albany High. 3D art, didn't used to call it that. Sculpture, right? Okay. Pottery, ceramics. It doesn't have to be a painting, but of course paintings are the easiest, paintings, drawings, and or photos that you created. I'll give you 5 points just for sending me those images. And then the third thing is, what do you want to learn from this class? And that is obviously got to have something to do with the context. Now, I said I'm asking you to do that, so we're gonna, before we take our break, I'm gonna keep it to about 8 minutes, and I'm gonna start out with a little of my own mini. So, you know, I did tell you I have a master's, so I've covered that. I mentioned that I've written 5 books. I'm not gonna have you look at all 5, but I am gonna hold up the covers of the 3 that are still in print and that are at your libraries. That means the campus libraries. I know that most of you won't go there, but you can pick out any book about any subject that the library has, you know, online first and reserve it. And then you can make an appointment to pick it up. Some of you know this, right? A curbside pickup, like they are doing with some businesses in San Francisco that are struggling. Boy, I worry about, I have friends that own restaurants, and I don't know how they're going to survive it, if they're even survived this far. But anyway, the libraries at least don't have that worry. So you could get any of these books, and you don't have to even think about them to get an A in the class. But if they might be of interest to you for extra credit, because the sites in these books are in the Bay Area, many of them anyway. These are architecture books that I wrote over the last 12 years or so. And they are in print, you know, various copies. So I'll hold up this one first. Julia Morgan, Architect of Beauty. I always have to figure out where it is. And who the heck was Julia Morgan? Okay, well, if you look at the cover and you see the photo on the cover, I'll bet a few of you have been there. Anybody here been to Hearst Castle? Hearst Castle? Never heard of it even? The biggest house in California. It's on the coast, halfway between here and LA. Well, if you've never gone there, you don't have to, of course.
I have, sir.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Who said that?
Nora.
You don't have to show your face. I know. Yeah. I understand. Oh, no, that's part of the beauty of this. Okay. When you were there, did they talk about the architect, Nora?
Maybe they did, but mostly it was just like a guided tour and things like that.
Yeah, the docents
I mostly stuck to the outside.
When were you there? How long ago?
This was maybe like 5 years ago.
Oh, well, then it'd be hard to remember. Yeah. Well, I was wondering if anybody had been there within the last year. The reason I'm asking that, there's 2 reasons. One is because the architect was this woman I just held the book up about, Julia Morgan, the first woman architect in American history. That is the first independent one, the first one to have her own practice. It didn't have to go through her husband, you know, and all that BS. That didn't have to prove herself first to a male partner, any of that. She had her own practice. She was an amazing woman. She produced over 750 buildings. That beats Frank Lloyd Wright's record by more than 200. And he's the most famous American architect in the history of our country, of course. So she was an amazing, accomplished woman. When women weren't even allowed to attend architecture school, then she was able to get herself into the top architecture school in the world in Paris. So all of that's mentioned in this book. And the sites of hers around here include, that you could go take photos of, 4 houses in Petaluma. They're all in my book, photos of them. No 2 are alike. They're all within a mile of each other. They're all easily visible from the curb. By the way, you know the rule, anyone, when you take a photo of a private residence, you just stay on the public domain, meaning is your foot clearly not touching their lawn? Because then you're on private property, even if it's just a couple of inches of the toe of your shoe. So just stay on the sidewalk or somewhere from the car and take a photo of the exterior. And of course, the other rule, this is just a courtesy, but also technically a legal requirement for people taking pictures of any private residences for any purpose. Make sure there's no people visible in the photos, because it's privacy, of course, is a violation. So as long as there's no one in the house visible from the street or on the porch or on the lawn, you can take, it's your right to take a photo. It's called public domain, as long as it's from the sidewalk or further back. So there are 4 of them. They're all listed, and I can give you the addresses if you want. You don't even have to look them up in the book, but that's one way to do it. The book was taken, the photos, I mean, for the book were taken by a very talented set of 2 photographers that I've worked with now for many years on 3 different books. Anyway, so there was also a Julia Morgan, there is, I mean, in, maybe you've heard of it, some of you, it's called Chapel of the Chimes here in Santa Rosa, well, where for most of you. It's in Santa Rosa, on Santa Rosa Avenue. Just as you get off that exit on 101 heading north, You couldn't even see it from the freeway, but the back of it, of course. It's a columbarium. It's where people who choose to be cremated, yes, they were cremating people back in the 20s and 30s when she designed the building. Actually, it was in the 30s. So, and after that, I mean, now it's the preferred method, right? For people in California, at least that's what I've read. The point is that she designed several columbariums. The most famous is in Oakland. It's breathtakingly beautiful. But this one isn't bad. It's got stained glass windows and all kinds of sculpture. But you don't have to go in it. I don't know if you can unless you want to. And of course, I'm sure they would exercise social distancing, but you could just take pictures of the exterior of that. Those are in this book. Anyway, she designed Hearst Castle. And when she did that, there was no limit to the budget she could because he was one of the, I think he was the third Hearst, the man, right, who the castle is named after. It's not one building. A lot of people think, oh, it's a single building that looks like a castle. Not really. It's 16 different buildings. If you went on the tour, can I ask you, is it Nora, right? Did you go into any of those buildings besides the big house they call a Casa Grande? No? Oh, okay. Probably already took off. Okay, so the point is that you can, see those buildings online and print out something for extra credit as an article, or you could even write a paper about one of them. So Julia Morgan's one of my favorite architects. And then my second book was about Bernard Maybeck, and he's the father of green design. I know none of you have heard of him unless you happen to be studying architecture. Last night, two of my students are architecture majors, they told me in their mini bio, and they had heard of Maybeck. Maybeck founded the architecture school at Berkeley. There wouldn't be any architecture school. It's a world famous school of architecture. If you ever want to become an architect, you would know about it because it's highly competitive and very highly respected around the world. He started that program, that college, and his first class, he had a young student named Julia Morgan. So she very much credited him with inspiring her to break through the glass ceiling of their profession. He encouraged her to go to the school in Paris where he'd gone, and he wrote letters and lobbied them, and they wouldn't let her in for 3 years. They made her sit around waiting, and she had to take this entrance exam 3 times, and she kept passing with more higher grades than the male students who had applied. Well, there's only one word for that, obviously sexism. But she was so talented that by the 3rd time she took the test, she was in the top 3%. From worldwide student applications, so they had to let her in. So Maybeck was obviously a good Jewish word is a mensch, a humanist, and he was an environmentalist. But when that wasn't even a term, he believed in preserving environment and not cutting through hills or diverting streams, and making the buildings he designed blend with the natural environment. Always used organic materials, natural, selected materials from the local environment. All the stuff we call green design, that phrase didn't exist until what, the 80s maybe? He's the pioneer of that. And his most famous building, you could go take pictures of it because you don't need permission. It's not indoors. It's the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. If you've ever seen almost half the movies filmed in San Francisco, and any movie with a wedding scene set in San Francisco in the last 25 years has used that. It's the famous temple-like building with a dome and columns around it on a lagoon with ducks. He even picked the ducks. Those ducks are descendants of the ones that Maybeck chose for that lagoon. It was from the World's Fair of 1915, and it's still there. People loved it so much they saved it after the fair. And then the last book is the one maybe most of you, or any of you have, if any of you have heard of this man, Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the book that sold the best. It's in its 4th printing now. And it's Frank Lloyd Wright on the West Coast. There's 250 books in print on Wright, but this is the only one that, so I've been told so far by the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, I used for the research, of course, and some of the images inside of him. I had to get permission for that, that it is the only comprehensive book to cover all of his work on the West Coast. So it includes 9 sites in the Bay Area that you could go see, including in the Berkeley Hills, in Marin. There are 2 of his buildings, and you may know the most famous is the Marin County Civic Center, which of course is probably still open to the public. I guess court sessions are back. I mean, court is back in session, I think, but you don't have to go inside it. Again, you could just drive or walk around it. It's a huge complex of several buildings, all of them designed by Wright right before he died. And then you take exterior 4 photos again of the exterior, and you get 10 points. Or you can go by any of his private residences in the Bay Area that are also listed in this book. And then lastly, I'll tell you, I started my career as a high school teacher in Oakland, public high school. And in one of my classes, this is the last thing I'll say before we take our break, there was a young student who had been particularly interested in theater. He was going to go to, I forget what school he said he was going to go to. It's a senior year. I was a student teacher, right? This is right when you practice. Some of you may know if you've ever been a teacher or plan to be or know anyone who is. You're supposed to spend a year. That's all it is to get a secondary teacher credential, but it's pretty intense. You have to do student teaching in 2 different school districts. So my second assignment was Skyline High School in Oakland, in the Oakland Hills. And during that year, that semester, I mean, I had this first period class, and the class was made up of people from all over Oakland, but this guy would come in late, this one student, almost every morning, because he took the last BART train from home from San Francisco, whatever it was, 1 or 1:30 in the morning after practicing at ACT in San Francisco. You all heard of ACT, I hope, right? One of the world famous theater companies in the Bay Area. And he was wanting to hone his skills as a future actor. He had curly brown hair. He was kind of handsome. He was funny. And he earned a B in my class because he was late with so many of his assignments. Can anybody guess who I'm talking about? Tom Hanks. Yep, Tom Hanks was a student of mine. I'm not, don't have to exaggerate. So you know what happened to him and how his career turned out. So listen to everything I say. You never know when it might come in handy later. Just being silly, obviously. Okay, but it's a true story. Okay, so now we're looking at, on my clock, which is ahead a little bit here, a nice even round number. It's easy to remember. 20-minute break at this point. So I am going to pause, stop the, video, right? Since this is going to be posted, people don't want to sit through a 20-minute break if they're looking at this. People aren't here tonight. Okay, and then let's see. You can take off, do whatever you need. It's 20 minutes to do what you want. If you have time to write those mini bios and send them to my email, AOL email, that would be good. But if not, you can do them anytime before the end of the day tomorrow. People that don't do that by the end of the next week, this is what I was told by our department chair, I'm supposed to drop them because that's like a no-show, as it would be in an in-person class. So, all right, everybody, anybody have any urgent questions? Of course, yes.
Ms. Wilson, yeah, sorry. I just want to ask a few questions about some of the stuff that you said at the beginning, just because I have some concerns, if you don't mind.
No, I don't.
Okay, so can I get your email one more time? Because I do
Sure.
have obviously like your Santa Rosa school email, but it's just that I joined your class kind of last minute, so I didn't get your syllabus or any of that information.
Sure.
So
You got your pen ready? Tay? It's Tay, right? Yes. You got your pen ready? Okay, here it is. It's easy. It's short. Okay, I'll say it slowly.
Okay.
Make sure you have it. It's Mark, M-A-R-K-W, 5 letters. My first name and last initial, Mark W at AOL.com. Pretty easy. AOL.com. Yeah, I know. Who has AOL? Well, I've had it since 1996. The same email address. Okay. Another question? Do you have another question?
Yeah, so if we don't have our textbooks right away, you said we have until next week, right?
That would be good if you can. I've had people say they've found them used copies on the internet, and I'm not good at shopping on the internet, but I know you can because other students have told me that.
Right. I'm on wait, so I'm a little frustrated about it not being delivered yet. So I'm trying my best to get some of your stuff in.
You can rent them. You can rent them.
Yeah. I'm just
okay, good. I didn't know if you knew.
Yeah, no, and also, so if these little mini bios, you said we can just, as long as we fill out the information that you asked of us to describe, then we can do it tonight, right? If you want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's how I'm going to take. It's not exactly roll, but it's how I verify who's. Because if someone doesn't show up online or contact me for 2 weeks, that's called a no-show, and then I have to drop them. I'm not making that rule. That's the college rule. Okay.
Right. And once I email you and get the copies of the attachments, then I'll have a full understanding.
Yes, I can do that tomorrow. I'll do it first thing. The first time I'll check my emails and I'll look for your, email name, I assume, or handle. As long as it gives me your name, because some people use email handles. You might not have been joining the class that far back that are like totally unrelated to their name, and that doesn't help me. So as long as it says you're from our 2.1 Wednesday night, I'll remember talking to you though. Yes, I'll send you all 3 of the handouts right away tomorrow.
Of course.
Okay?
And then, so does that mean, since I don't have these obviously, but does it mean that from the week until next week of our conference call, will we have other assignments to do prior? I know you said that our
No, just reading. And I'll tell you what that is. Let's do that when we start after the break,
Right.
because it's not hard. It's just one chapter, and they're not long chapters in
Okay.
each of the two books. So
Okay.
hopefully you'll get the book by the time of the next class.
Right.
And even if you didn't, you could catch up easily, unless it goes on for like 2 or 3 weeks, which I would be very concerned. There are copies at the library, and they are available, but I forget if because of the pandemic they allow you to check them out or not, of both books on reserve. But that's like, you know, fallback plan Z or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. I hope I answered your questions. I'll look for your email tomorrow. So let's go ahead and take our break now from, it's now.
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, please go ahead. Yes.
Just to double check, what do we write in our mini bio?
Just first, a paragraph about your background as to A, where you've lived, B, if you've traveled anywhere, and C, what kind of work you've done. Okay. Those 3 things. All right, the first half, and then something about your experiences with art, whether you're an artist yourself or you know some, or you're interested in art. Just what your experience relating to art is, you know, painting, sculpture, architecture. And the last thing is just one sentence. What do you want to learn about in this class most? What are you most interested in? Ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, you know, the Minoans, you know, whatever. Oh, there are different subjects that we're covering. So take a look at the syllabus if it isn't obvious already. And pick a subject on the syllabus that interests you most. So I will try to make that, emphasize that subject when we get to it. Okay, is that it for now? We'll take our break. All right, see you guys in 20 minutes. All right, at least most of you hopefully will be back by now. It's exactly 20 minutes since we started the break. Oh, we have somebody want to entering the admit to the room. Okay, yeah, if you signed off, usually you shouldn't have to do more than just click on something at your end, but if you need me to do something else, admit or formally click on something, let me know. Okay, this is an important part of the class. It's the first time that we will do just about an hour. We should be able to do it in that, maybe a tad under that, which will be 4 slides. Like I said, we're starting off fairly slowly to cover how, or give you, all of you, a clear idea of how to write your notes for future reference, for future study. And these are going to be what I call must-know slides. You'll hear me say that throughout the semester. What that means is they're from the syllabus. So unless I cut the syllabus at the point which I reserve the right to, you see here on this syllabus, first page, note below week 1, the instructor reserves the right to cut slides. For instance, if we get interrupted and we lose something, some time, you know, power failure or otherwise, there's something else we're, you know, not able to do one night, and I cut those slides, then they're not going to come back up later. You won't have to worry about them for the exam. But also before the 2 exams, we'll review for the exams, and I will remove at least 40% of the entire set of slides from that particular, you know, half of the course. Okay, at least maybe 50%. Okay, but for now, assume any slide on the syllabus could be on the exam. Now I need to get confirmation because I unmuted. Can everybody hear me? Well,
Yes,
good.
I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for the thumbs up. It just so I know, you know, because you guys don't have to say word 1 to get an A in this class at any point by any means. But if you feel like it, as I said before, when we first started tonight, throughout the semester, unless something changes, like, you know, things get too hectic or chaotic, which I doubt, I welcome, not recommend, welcome questions from anybody at any time. So I'm not muting all, as it's the function where I would just be talking and you'd be taking notes. So feel free to ask questions. Okay, here's the first thing before we get going, is if you want to have your notes organized in a very easy to remember or easy to review way for the study purposes for exam, or even to use some of them for your papers, perhaps some of you will. Okay, excuse me, something in the air. There's smoke all around Berkeley. I don't know about up there. A lot of smoke today. Sorry. Anyway, the point is that you should divide your notes into two main categories, all of your notes for the rest of the semester from the slides. And those are meaning. Should always start with the heading. I would make a separate heading, however you want to hand print it in capital letters or underline it. Meaning, below that, I'll be giving you always at the start of each slide, the first information you'll get is about the meaning. We always start that way. And then the second category is formal analysis. 2 words, just like it sounds, formal analysis. We are going to spend the first half of next week taking a nice, slow, steady discussion, and any questions you'll have, you'll be welcome to do from a whiteboard that I actually bought for this purpose, because I used to use the one in the classroom, obviously can't do that. That's going to be fit just nicely on the one blank wall I have in this room. And what we're going to do with the whiteboard is I'm going to illustrate for you examples of each of the elements of composition. You will get a handout. I'll be sending it to you probably tomorrow, so you'll have it for several days. You don't have to do anything with it, but print it out and have it next to you next week, because we're going to spend the first half of the class going over these techniques artists used for thousands of years now to create works of art, like what kind of colors they can use, types of categories of color, or how they create shading, and that's called modeling. But these are terms you won't know yet unless you studied art history already. So I don't expect you to know anything about them by the end of tonight, except the notes I give you. So what we'll do is we'll start out, like I said, very slow. We'll do the meaning, just, a few sentences, maybe 2 paragraphs at most, about the meaning of each of the 4 slides we're going to look at now. And then the other half will be, let's just say 3 on each slide, 3 of the 9 techniques artists can use, 3 of the 9 elements of composition on each slide. That'll get just a sort of slow beginning start to how to look at a work of art. All of those are covered in detail in Sarah Gill's book, The Critic Sees. Beautifully written. It's not technical jargon. It's plain English. I think it's the best book on that subject I've seen. I knew about it before I ever met her, in fact. So I highly recommend that you keep up with the reading on that. It's just 1 or 2 chapters a week, and they're short chapters and easy to understand. One last thing for extra credit, I forgot. If you go to the Santa Rosa Press Democrat website, that's real easy to do. And you look up July 13th, the op-ed section, it's free, unless you've been doing that a lot, because after the 10th time, they ask you to subscribe. So if you haven't checked anything on their website for more than 8 or 9, logons, it's free. I had an article called that they published in their op-ed section with illustrations and photos called Heroes versus Villains. It was about, it's definitely about art. It's about the controversy over all the statues being torn down and which ones maybe should or shouldn't be, subject to that kind of censorship, or whatever you want to call it, canceling, however you want to call that. I mean, it's a legitimate issue, which it's been since before the Black Lives Matter movement even started. In the South, there were people wanting to tear down some of the Confederate statues decades ago. And of course, that's gained momentum lately. So that article is just 800 words. If you download it, print it, take a screenshot, whatever, and send it to me as an attachment, that qualifies as 5 points extra credit. Okay, so we are now going to do screen share, and we are going to start with the first must-know slide, which is this one. Let me get rid of that. Yeah, there we go. And I want to make it larger. So here we go. All right. This is the first one you take notes on. So remember to start your notes under the heading meaning. Okay. And I'm only going to read and spell the names, of the titles and the artists and give you the date once for each slide. We'll never get through the semester. So I will say them very slowly, but they are on the syllabus. I know a couple of you don't have it. So that's why I'm going to do it extra slowly and carefully tonight. this title of this painting, and it is a painting, is the, 3 words, Libyan Sibyl. So that the second word is Libyan, like the country, Libyan, Libyan, the Libyan. And then the third word is Sibyl, Sibyl, the Libyan Sibyl. And then the artist's name, we only give you either their last name, or in the case of this artist, he chose to sign his work with only his first name. You've heard of him, everyone, Michelangelo. I'm pretty sure you all know how to spell his name, but if not, it's Michelangelo, Michelangelo. And the date is 1512. I'm going to give you a little bit, I hope, of stress reduction here when it comes to the exam. Of course, it's open book, so that right there makes it so much easier. When I asked you for the dates, and you're only going to have to write about 8 works of art on the midterm and on the final. And I asked you for the date, it's, you know, just a couple of points out of the 100 for the exam. But if you want to get those dates right, I don't ask for the exact year, just the decade. So this one, for instance, what does that mean? You could just write 1510, 1510, if that makes it easier, because it's one less digit to remember when it comes time to study. So again, the Libyan Sibyl, Michelangelo, 1512. Okay, the other handout that you should always have out every night of class, I've mentioned it and I sent it to everyone who was enrolled before today, and I think even a couple people that enrolled this morning. It's called List of Terms to Know. Okay, there's only 2 tonight. Like I said, we're going to start out slow. Now, the most we'll ever have in one night might be 5, but most of these definitions are only 1 or 2 lines. However, I left enough room for a few definitions that might be even possibly 3 lines. So you can write them right on here, but that's your responsibility, because by writing them, it's more proactive, you're more involved in the process, and you write in your own, you know, whatever, easily readable text, handwriting, whatever, the definition as I give it to you. So each time a new term comes up during the lecture, I will stop and spell the word and give you the definition. But the word is here, each one spelled on this handout. So fresco, right? Again, if you don't have this handout, that's Fresco. I think you've all heard that word, a fresco. Very short definition. A fresco is a painting on wet plaster, period. That's it. A painting on wet plaster. That's what we're looking at. So where is this painting? Some of you know. It's on the ceiling of a chapel, a small church in Rome. And it's one of, here's the meaning now. You should be writing this. Is the first fact about the meaning is, what are we looking at? You know, what's the context of this work of art? And then what's its story? What's it trying to tell us? And then something about the artist. Usually that's the 3 things you should know about meaning for either the answers on the essay part of the 2 exams or in your papers. You should be able to say something about, you know, the work itself. What is its story? What is the meaning of it in terms of the artist's, you know, message? What are they illustrating? Something about the artist's life, maybe, and then possibly something else about the techniques, the style. The style. We'll talk about all 3. So let's start with, what is this? Where is it? I'll say it again. It's on the ceiling. It's a fresco on the ceiling of a chapel in Rome. And some of you know, if you don't write this now, if you don't already know, Michelangelo was on his back, literally laid on his back on scaffolding for 4 years to paint these scenes. And they're all scenes in the Bible. So this is another way to write that, is that this is one of 18 different scenes in the Bible painted by Michelangelo during a 4-year period while he worked lying on his back on the ceiling to paint the ceiling. It's a remarkable thing. Anybody here been to Italy? Nope. You usually get 1 or 2. Well, if you go, that's somewhere you definitely want to see.
I've been there. I've been to Rome though, and I kind of hated it.
Well, it's hot and it's crowded. You talking about the place itself or the whole city?
Well, I've been to Rome. We went to the Vatican, but we didn't really go anywhere else. My mom got pickpocketed our first day there.
Yeah,
and so we spent the rest of the trip trying to find a way to get she's an alien, so getting her back into the country was kind of a struggle.
Now, that's a very relevant story because the first time I went to the Louvre that I forgot to have a money belt, tip, word to the wise, I told you I've been to 40 countries and I've been robbed in more than one, but rarely compared to the average American tourist, and that can happen to anybody. But don't put your valuables in your pants pockets. No, no, no. You need to have a money belt around your neck that's, not visible inside your shirt or further down.
Yeah.
That's how you avoid it. I was told that by the French police. They never caught the guy, but they found out what he did with my credit cards. He was spending them all over France. And the B of A finally had to reimburse me the money. Yeah, I know. It's something to be aware of. Sorry about that. Sorry that happened to you. Well, anyway, that wouldn't affect if you were lucky enough to get into the chapel and look up at the ceiling. Did you get into this chapel?
Not that chapel, no, unfortunately.
Oh,
not.
yeah, that would have been, you would have remembered it, that as one of the positive events that you experiences. Okay, let's talk about the meaning of what's this scene depicting. It's a scene from the Bible. That doesn't tell us anything. This is a type of angel. I know some of you, if you really know your religious history, will know Sybil's not exactly an angel, but that's too detailed for this. We're keeping things simple in this course because we have so much to cover. So let's just say a type of angel who can tell the future, that's what a Sybil is, to human beings down on earth when God orders her or tells her to do so. So that's what you see happening here. She's lifting a giant book. You can see it's massive off of a pedestal. It's called the Book of Prophecies. And it predicts the future for people down on earth. So that, would be, if, in all the romantic comedies ever filmed, they always say, do you believe in fate? That's that. Philosophers have debated that for centuries. So this is a scene in which a person's future is already determined. They're down on earth. They've asked a question. Usually they're praying. They're asking in a prayer, God, tell me, will I live through battle in war tomorrow? Will my child die of this illness? Will I be happy if I marry this person? That kind of a question. Not what are the lottery winning numbers tomorrow? God wouldn't answer that one. So Sibyls were assigned to answer life or death questions when God told them to, and that's what she's doing. The other word, and that's the only other term, so there's the two right off the bat that you won't need to write any more definitions after this tonight, is also equally short. Cherub. It's the second one on your list, but I'll spell it if you don't have that list. CHERUB. A cherub is a baby angel often found in Renaissance art. Well, my arrow's pointing to the cherub, if you can see, I think you can, right? The cursor. And he's goofing off. I mean, it's almost deliberately humorous. Many historians think that Michelangelo got so tired of working on his back and getting sick from the fumes and the dust, which he did several times during that 4 years. And he walked off the job because he wasn't being paid. And the Pope forced him at the point of a sword, not the Pope personally. He said his army. Yeah, the popes had armies back then. They had their own kingdoms. I mean, they had much more power than they do today. So he ordered his own soldiers to bring Michelangelo back to Rome in chains to finish this. It's absolutely a true story. So that's part of the meaning. How did it get finished? Because the Pope forced the artist to return to his work. Okay, so this cherub may have been a humorous sidebar, comment by the artist. He looks like he's looking at himself or maybe another cherub. It's hard to tell. Either a reflection. They had mirrors, of course, all the way back to ancient Egypt. So either he's looking at a reflected surface, maybe the marble of the wall, or at another cherub. He's goofing off. He's not helping. He's supposed to be a cherub. What's the point of a cherub? They're supposed to be a companion and maybe an assistant to a more powerful figure like an angel. He isn't helping, right? He's even pointing, it looks like, at her and how hard she's working. So what's the last fact about the meaning you should now have in your notes? And that's this style of the work and the quality of realism. That's what Renaissance, so this is a Renaissance style painting. This is a major fact about the meaning, by the greatest Renaissance painter of the human body. Michelangelo was the most skilled, you could say talented, at painting the human body realistically. Look at the way her muscles, right, and her skin tone and her hair and the pose of her body we'll get to in a minute. That's one unusual fact, but that's under the composition or formal analysis. So let's finish up on the meaning, which would be, what is Michelangelo's background? I mean, what fact about his background qualified him to paint this realistically human bodies, even though it's supposed to be an angel. Obviously, the person who posed for it was a human woman, obviously. Some of you know this, right? He cut up dead bodies as a young art student. The right word is, or phrase, dissected cadavers. Why did he do that? Because he was a ghoul? No, he did that to understand how the human body looks in different positions, how muscles are connected to bones and sinews, how the human body looks in different positions. So as you may have guessed, in case you're curious, wait a minute, how did that work? He didn't rob graves. He paid grave diggers who were about to dispense with a recently deceased homeless person. They called them paupers back then. If there was no family member to claim the body, they were thrown into unmarked graves. And so no one could object. Of course, there was no one around to object. So he would pay, as a young art student in his early 20s, I believe it was, grave diggers in whatever cemetery I think he was in Florence then, anyway, in where he lived, to bring him the most freshly available corpses so he could cut them up. And then, of course, he'd tell them when he was done and they buried them. He didn't keep them sticking around for very long, just long enough to do some experimental dissecting. Now, Da Vinci did that, but he did it legally because he was a scientist, and scientists and doctors were legally allowed to dissect cadavers in Italy then, but not artists. So Michelangelo was breaking the law when he did that, but he felt he had to. So plenty of facts on the meaning. If this were on the exam, you would not have to mention all of that. Just a paragraph. I'll explain how to write the exam and everything long before we get to the midterm. Okay, so now shifting to the second category for your notes on this slide. Formal analysis. You should have that heading. That's a composition. So what's the first thing we notice about this? Well, since we want to end, on time tonight, we'll probably end about 9:45-ish. I'll just tell you, I usually ask people, what do you see first when you look at this? Well, some of you already thought this. She's posed in an unusual, some would even say awkward, unusual, or not natural or common position. The position of her body is very awkward, very twisty, some people say, or full of turns. Well, that's very important because now this is what you should write. What I just said is a descriptive phrase, but now you should write that her pose is dynamic. That's the right word in art analysis for this kind of figure. When a person, or it doesn't matter, an animal or an object from anything in a painting or actual sculpture, three-dimensional work of art, or in a building, any part of a work of art that has two or more curved or diagonal lines is dynamic. Well, this whole painting is dynamic. Even the book, the cover and the pages, those are diagonals. And both the Cherub and the Sibyl, their entire bodies are full of curved lines. Even the way her toe, which by the way is the heaviest toe in the history of art, someone estimated weighs 5 pounds. It's a large toe. Some think it was a man that posed for this. It could have been. It could easily have been, because women weren't supposed to pose for paintings back then unless they were wealthy portraits being painted of wealthy women. Then it was okay, or marriage, gifts from future husbands or something like that. So it could have been a man. But in any case, what we know is there's only two parts, I should say, two sections of this whole painting that aren't dynamic. Her whole body is, the Cherub's is, the book she's lifting. But the box she's resting her foot on is stable. The opposite dynamic is stable. So that's actually one of the 9 elements of composition. Look for straight lines, and those are all straight, of course, with right angles. And that one little section of this painting is stable. Everything else is dynamic, except the lines across the top of the wall there. Those are stable. But it's like more than 90% dynamic. What else do you notice when you first look at this? Many people say the color of her dress. It's a bright orange. And then this looks like the underside of the same dress is obviously it's a different color. It's almost salmon, right? Or you could say pink, warm pink. And then her flesh tones, and of course she's a European woman, so they're pink, as are the skin tones of the Cherub, and then both of them have blonde hair. All of those colors are called warm. Warm colors are colors that come from nature or the earth. They're called earth tones, but the right word in art analysis when you're describing colors in a work of art, if there are earth tones, warm. Some people call them bright, but that's not the right word in art history or art analysis. It's warm earth tones, or just warm. Warm colors are gold, yellow, red. We'll cover all this in more detail next week, and you'll have the handouts before we get to that discussion. But again, I'll just list them briefly. So, you know, the colors you see there are like pink, right? And gold and yellow and orange and brown, like on the box where her toe is. And then there's different shades of those colors. So those are all earth tones or natural colors that appear in the viewer's eyesight before the opposite of warm colors, which some of you have already figured this out. The whole background is, those aren't warm colors. It's cool is the opposite of warm. So the background has green, a little bit of blue on the book cover, and maybe this curtain somewhat blue, and gray. Those are the main colors: green, blue, gray, and shades of white are cool, the opposite of warm. Those are colors you don't notice as quickly or as soon as you do the warm colors, which is the reason Michelangelo chose to make the body and the dress of the main figure of the Sibyl almost all warm colors. He wants you to see it first. And then the last thing I'll mention is mass or size. The largest object is one of the 9 elements, so we'll just do 3 on each slide tonight. Her body is the largest object in the painting, isn't it? When you add that up. And then the next largest, it's probably these 2 panels, these sculpted panels on the corner, you know, of other, looks like other cherubs. And then the actual cherub himself, but some people would say, no, it's a pedestal, because it looks like one tall table or box or something on the books resting on. So there's no absolute right or wrong, except that if you were on this, if this was on the exam and you were to say the cherub is the largest object or the largest mass, that would be wrong, obviously. That angel's nowhere near as big as the, so just listing the 2 or 3 largest parts or objects in a painting, a drawing, a photo, or a building, or group sculpture, that's called mass or volume. You don't have to list the size or the relative size of it. You just say the largest mass is whatever that is. In this case, it's her, the symbol. Okay, I know that's a lot. We're, you know, trying to start slow. Any questions? All right, we'll go to the second must-know slide. Now, these are Picasso and Impressionist paintings, and we're not covering those in this class. So, but this we are, actually. This could easily be on the exam because it's an ancient Greek sculpture and there's a juicy story to it. Some of you may know if you've read your Stockstead, depending on which edition you have. In the introduction of one edition, she talked about this. Okay, so now you want to write the second set of notes for this second slide. The title is Laocoon Group. That's the name of the man in the middle who's obviously in pain. I'll say why in a minute. His name again is Laocoon, or Laocoon, Laocoon, group. Group meaning there's more than one figure. It's him and his 2 sons, if you want to know who the other 2 are. The artist's name, we actually know the artist. Sometimes in ancient art, we don't know who the artist was, but we do know the sculptor of this. It's Polydorus, one word. You may guess that's Greek. It sounds Greek. He was Greek. Polydorus. Polydorus. Now for the date, you can be I will be flexible, and you can choose. If you just want to write 100 BC, or if you prefer BCE. By the way, those who've traveled to multiple countries, as I guess a few of you have, you probably have noticed this. I certainly have, even as recently as just a year or 2 ago. Most of the world still uses BC and AD. It's just like they use the Greenwich meridian for longitude and latitude, and the times that are based on the London mean time. You know, it's a convenient way to measure things. And most of the world uses the metric system, right, instead of inches and feet. But us English-based cultures in that one regard, in terms of measurement, we use feet and miles and things. So this is your choice. In this class, it's fine with me to use BCE if you prefer, before the Common Era, or BC. I just keep things as short and simple as I can for you when you're studying. So I use BC and AD. Okay, BC, meaning about 100 years before the Common Era, before the birth of Christ, of course. Okay, so if you want to write it that way, you can write 100 BC or BCE, or you can write like I did in the syllabus that Stockstead used, 1st century BC. Okay, let's talk about the meaning. This is an ancient Greek sculpture, which depicts a scene from the Trojan War. Now, a few of you may have seen the Brad Pitt movie Troy. Anybody? It's not a bad movie. You could watch no, it's not about the life of an artist, but it's about this incident among many others. So let's just say what you need to know. The first thing you should have in your notes on the meaning is this is an ancient Greek sculpture that depicts an event in the Trojan War when the Greeks left the wooden horse. Now, almost everybody's heard of that, right? The giant wooden horse. It was a trick they played on the Trojans. They said they were not going to attack. They were giving up their attempt to conquer the city of Troy. They couldn't succeed after 10 years. So they were abandoning the battlefield and left behind a gift. Well, of course, it wasn't a gift. It was a ruse. It was a very clever trick in which they hid their soldiers inside the horse. So that story is what this depicts the aftermath of, which is what? Laocoon was a Greek fortune teller. He could read the future. He knew about the soldiers in the horse, though he couldn't see through the wooden horse exterior, but he just knew the Greeks were hiding soldiers. He tried to warn the Trojan, is the point, to cut to the chase. And the Greek gods punished him because he was a traitor to his own people, his own cause, by telling the Trojans that they were in danger of being massacred at night, which is what happened, right, when they took the horse in the city gates, and later that night the soldiers came out. So he's trying to warn the Trojans, even though he was Greek. So he was punished by the Greek gods. That's what you're seeing here. He's being punished by the god of the sea, Poseidon. The Romans called him Neptune. You can use either word. And by the way, spelling, you don't have to worry about getting points off on any words that you write in your papers or on the exam, except the ones on the syllabus. Those for full credit, you would need to spell correctly, like the name of the artist or the country or the title. So if you don't know how to spell Poseidon, Neptune is pretty straightforward, right? There's a planet by that name. Just write either one the best you can. Just say the ancient god, Greek god of the sea, sent a sea serpent. That's what this is supposed to be. It looks like just a very large boa constrictor snake. And see, there's its head chomping away on his hip. But he said, the Greek myth says, and it's a myth, obviously, not actual history. A giant sea serpent was ordered by Neptune out of the sea to crush to death this guy, Laocoon, and his two sons. His sons were with him. So in other words, he caused his own death and the death of his two sons. He saw them die right in front of him, and it was his own fault. So he's in agony emotionally and physically from having made this mistake, betraying his own people and suffering the punishment. That's the meaning. The only other thing to add about the meaning is that it's a late Greek sculpture. This is just one last fact, and then we'll do a formal analysis. Late Greek sculpture is more ornate than earlier Greek sculpture. If you ever seen, and we'll cover several famous, athletes standing by themselves, in marble Greek sculptures, right, of warriors or athletes, it's just the figure of the person and maybe, a nice set of details on their muscles and maybe their hair, but there isn't a lot of decorative carved detail. Here there is. You see it, his face, his expression, the hair, the beard, the rippling muscles. This cloth here looks like he was wearing a robe that's falling off his body. And then we have the snake, it's supposed to be a sea serpent, and his two sons. Again, this one here clearly had something on that's falling off his shoulder. So all those extra details make this more ornate. You can say it that way in your notes, or more detailed than earlier Greek sculpture. And that's a sign of the style of this is late Greek. There's another word for it, which we will get to later when we get to Greek art. You don't have to know it for the notes on this slide, but for those who want to, the right word for that style is Hellenistic, which means coming from ancient Greece, but it's late, like right before the Romans took over. So it's long after the golden age of Athens this was created. It's just say late Greek style, which is more detailed and more ornate. That's plenty on the meaning, so let's do the formal analysis. Well, he's in the middle, the father, right, Laocoon, and his two sons are almost the same height. If you actually draw a line, they're slightly different, but they're about the same size, right? So if we were going to do mass on this, it's easy. You'd say he's the largest mass, then the two sons, and then the snake or sea serpent. You could say it either way. But that's not what I'm now about to give you as the first of three things about the composition for this slide. The placement of the figures causes it to be roughly, this whole sculpture is roughly balanced. It's not exactly balanced, but roughly. Why? Because the main figure, the father, is in the middle, and his body, you see how it goes across, right? The middle of the entire group here. His one leg is further over to the right on our side, and his raised arm over to the left, but he's in the middle. And his two sons are about the same size, and they're on either side. If this guy was standing up, he would be the same size as his brother, roughly. So since you have one main figure in the middle, across the middle of the group, and two roughly equal size smaller figures, one on either side, that's called balance. This is balanced, roughly balanced. And then we have line. Carved in a sculpture, line is carved with usually a chisel, right? Or some other heavy metal instrument. And look how much carved line there is. That's part of what makes this, again, the more ornate style of late Greek sculpture. But that's all line, but it's not like in a painting where you paint the line or draw in a drawing. It's carved line. So this is called carved line. And then the color, what color is this? It's white, a very kind of off-white. It's white marble. So that is a cool color. It's not warm. If this was next to a piece of sculpture, or if one of the figures had warm colors on their body, or even just their hair or their clothing, the robes around them, you'd see that first, like if it was red or brown or gold. But these are all the same color, white marble. And then that's cool. A cool color is all you have to say about color on this piece. There are no warm colors. Finally, is it dynamic or stable? Well, we already kind of defined what makes something dynamic. Oh, this is totally dynamic. The only thing stable on this piece is the base, because there are your right angles and straight line, just the base. That's original, by the way. This is the pedestal it's on. Did you see the person that went to Rome? You probably didn't. If you went to the Vatican, the museum in the Vatican, this is on the staircase. At least it was the last time I was in Rome, of one of the many, many museums in the Vatican. I think it is the wealthiest little city state, the Vatican. It's actually technically a separate country, right, from Rome, the big city of the capital.
Technically they're sovereign or whatever.
Yeah, they have their own diplomats and embassies and everything, and their own.
We never made it inside.
What did you
all our
get
money
to see?
was in my mom's wallet.
Oh, well, after that, did you see anything? Just even, how about the Colosseum?
Colosseum we saw. We saw the outside of the Vatican. We walked around and saw a bunch of buildings and stuff.
The Forum?
Yeah, I
Great.
believe so.
Well, then I hope it wasn't a wasted trip, because it's.
I wouldn't say so. It was a little disappointing because of that situation.
Of course.
But other than that, I liked what I saw. That's for sure.
Yeah. So you may or may not choose. It's your call entirely. When we get to slides of Rome, and I have my own slides of that too, where you don't have to take notes. I've been there like 4 times. I have friends in Italy. You might want to comment on what you thought about. I bet you know. Don't do it now, because we got to keep moving. But what the Colosseum was used for, everybody knows about the gladiator combat, but there was more things than that the Colosseum was used for. We'll talk about that later. Okay, now we're getting to something I think everyone can relate to, even if you've never studied art before: a Van Gogh painting. Okay, this is the third must know. Wheat field and cypress trees. That's the title. Now, I shouldn't have to spell. I'll spell cypress. Some of you have never written that word. The type of tree. CYPRESS. So again, the title is Wheat Field, 2 words, and Cypress Trees, or 2. Right? Van Gogh, I'm pretty sure everyone knows how to spell. It's 2 words, of course. Van Gogh. The Dutch say Van Gogh. And the date is 1888. So you could just write 1880s. Okay, I think everybody thinks they know everything there is, or much, not everything, I shouldn't say that, but a lot more than most of us really do know about Van Gogh's personal life. All kinds of new theories have been coming up about, like, how he died, how he may not have committed suicide. I'm beginning to believe that, because the evidence is mounting that it wasn't suicide at all, that he was actually accidentally shot by 2 teenage thugs who harassed and harangued him for being mentally ill. But let's cut to the chase on the meaning here now. Here's what you should write. Van Gogh had a style of his own, and this painting, remember, style is always part of the meaning, is what we call a classic, you could say, or prime example of the Van Gogh style. He invented it. People copied him, were influenced by it, or modified their own style after he became famous. But I think you all know he only ever sold one painting before he died. So he was unknown, nearly unknown, except to a few other artists and a handful of critics who understood his genius. But most people, even in France, where he lived and worked his whole career, he was Dutch, but he lived most of his adult life in France. They didn't understand him. So he invented a style, and this is a classic example for his landscapes called the Van Gogh style. How do you define that? That's the main part of the meaning. We're going to talk, well, first half of the meaning, and then we'll talk about him and the myth about his ear. And that could also be part of the meaning on this slide, if it is on the midterm. Okay, Van Gogh style had three features. I'm going to point them out with my cursor here. One is an undulating, that's UNDA, right? Undulating. It's UNDULATING. Again, you don't have to worry about the spelling of any word not on the syllabus. Write it as it sounds. And undulating or writhing, that's with the WRITHING. An undulating or writhing motion to his main objects. That's true for every Van Gogh landscape. Once he invented his own style. When he was a young student of art, he was still developing it. Okay, so where do we see the undulating effect or motion? Oh, everywhere in this. Even the cypress trees undulate their way towards the sky. Look at the clouds. Even the clouds have that effect. And then most shocking, some would call it. They called him a shocking. But few critics that wrote about him attacked his work, during his lifetime. Until right after he died. And then suddenly they call him a genius. So you see the mountains, look at that, the tops of the mountains, and even the trees and the bushes around the two cypress trees and the hills behind those cypress trees, everything, even the wheat, the tops of the wheat, undulating or writhing motion everywhere. So that's one feature of the Van Gogh style. The second one to write now is a use, you could just say a use of bold outlines. You see where my arrow is pointing here? Combined with soft modeling. Now, we haven't talked about modeling. That's one of the elements of composition. But in order to define his style, we have to mention that modeling is a technique of shading. We'll just keep it simple. There's more to it than that. We'll discuss that next week with the 9 elements when we do that at the start of class. So for now, just say that modeling or shading, soft modeling or shading combined with a bold outline is a trademark of his work. You see it on the trees. You see the bold outlines on these scrub oaks, I guess. And it's even more noticeable on the landscape, the ground. And I guess that's probably wheat there, though the color's the same as this. So you see bold outline around the main objects, not all the objects, combined with soft modeling, MODELING. That's the second Van Gogh technique. And the third is the most brilliant of all. He had his own color theory. It's Van Gogh's color theory. No one else ever came up with it. He believed colors had symbolic meaning. So, for instance, in this painting, the warm colors, yellow, gold, and shades of, specifically, not all warm colors, but specifically, gold, yellow, or shades of gold and yellow, he believed they were symbolic of human happy or positive, you can say it either way, human emotions. The happier or more positive human emotions like, joy, love, acceptance, satisfaction with what he had. Very little of any of those things in his life, as you may know. The only person that accepted him as who he was and recognized his genius throughout his adult life was his brother, you may know that, who tried to sell his paintings. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened to the idiots that turned his paintings down at the gallery his brother owned in Paris. Once they found out how, after he died, his paintings went up in price and they missed the chance to buy one for $50, in francs. They must have kicked themselves deservedly. Anyway, that's a sidebar. Don't write that. Things sometimes just happen that way. Genius isn't recognized during its own time. Often happens. Okay, so what are the other two? We'll keep to 3. He had multiple very complex color theory, but we'll just talk about the three main types of colors he believed symbolized various aspects of human existence. Okay, green and shades of green, like the whole middle of this painting, the trees, the bushes, the cypresses, symbolize the negative human emotions, fear, anger, hate, sadness or grief, jealousy, any of the negative human emotions. He believed green was what he should use to symbolize them. And then the third part of his color theory that we're going to have time for now is the use of blue or shades of blue, like the mountains and the sky, or some of the clouds anyway in the sky. That's symbolic of a divine presence. So you might not know this. You don't really have to write it, but what does that mean? It's another way of saying God, but he wasn't a traditional religious person. His father was a minister, by the way. But the point is, he didn't subscribe to any one religion. He just believed there was this higher power in the universe, and he called it the divine presence. And sometimes he wrote the word God. How do we know? He wrote letters every day of his adult life to his brother, and wisely his brother saved every single letter. We have almost all of them. They've been published in about 100 languages. And books and movies and documentaries have been made about the letters he wrote to his brother. So we know when he finished the painting, he wrote a letter about it and sent it to his brother. You know, he didn't send the painting, he sent the letter. So we can tell what he was feeling and thinking about each painting. The last fact about him, as you probably, many of you know, is he was, I call it manic depressive. I know nowadays it's more people say bipolar. You can write it either way. There's a slight variation in some people's minds about those two terms, but they're really overlapping. What that means is he had intensive mood swings, as many of you know. If you've ever known, I did. I had 2 members of my own family, 2 of my family out of 6 had that. It's genetic. You don't choose it. You're born with it. And of course, it means you go back and forth or vary, kind of vary between deep, dark depressions and even self-destructive thoughts and positive, even manic energy, and that sometimes his best paintings were created in his manic phase. This one, many historians and the letter he wrote to his brother about it indicate he was in somewhere in between. He was feeling an oncoming depression perhaps, but he still had a positive feeling about this beautiful summer landscape. Is in the summer in southern France where he was living. And the last thing to say about him on the meaning is the fact that he never cut his ear off. That's a myth. He had an argument with Gauguin. Don't ask me to spell it. Gauguin was sadly, his roommate, free of charge. His brother wanted, that is Van Gogh's brother, wanted Gauguin to go down to live with Vincent so he could have company and not be lonely. And he thought, oh, fellow painter, he met him in Paris at my studio, so they'll be good companions. Oh, no, it was the opposite. Gauguin was an egomaniac and an insensitive bigot. He was a child molester. You can't quite say that. Let's just say that he was sexist to the extreme. And a terrible person, a brilliant painter, but a terrible person. Van Gogh was the opposite, sensitive, kind, tried to be nice to everybody. They couldn't get along. So after one intense argument, Van Gogh said if he hadn't done this, he would have tried to kill or attacked Gauguin and tried to kill him. When Gauguin left their apartment, he cut his earlobe off. So yes, it was a self-destructive act in a moment of depression, but he didn't do it for a prostitute. And he didn't cut his whole ear off, or he would have died. He would have bled to death because Gauguin didn't find him until the next morning and helped him bandage his ear. So yes, he did harm himself, but it wasn't quite that way. Okay, formal analysis. Well, let's do this quickly because we have one more slide and we'll rush through it quickly, which is architecture. You do need to know we're going to cover lots of architecture in this class. Okay, so we have bold outline. Line, remember, is a technique of composition. So he used bold outlines everywhere. It's totally dynamic. Is it balanced? Oh, brilliantly. Look at the way the landscape, see where my arrow is going up to the top of the hills, and the entire land section or solid earth portion of the painting roughly balances with the area of the sky. By the way, the painting goes down about an inch if you would see a full-size print of it in its actual, I've seen this, it's in Paris, actually down below the edge of the screen. So it's balanced roughly, in an unusual diagonal way. And then we have warm colors on the wheat and cool on almost everything else, the mountains, the sky, and the trees. Okay, Last thing, last must know. This is Guggenheim Museum, Guggenheim. Again, Guggenheim. That's the name of a billionaire family. They were already billionaires back in the 50s when this was built. Museum, 2 words. Guggenheim Museum by Wright. I already mentioned, you probably know, the most famous architect ever that ever lived. In America, some would say only the most famous American architect. He called himself the world's most famous architect. That's how he's signed his work, and that's how he testified in court and how he wrote about himself. World's most famous architect, yes. He had a bit of an ego. Wright is, as you probably know, Wright, 1959. So the facts about this I can give you pretty quickly, the main facts about the meaning. This is a museum of modern art in New York City near Central Park. It is not the Museum of Modern Art. That's a separate museum. That's much older. So this is a Museum of Modern Art built by a billionaire, you just say very wealthy family, the Guggenheims. And they insisted that Wright design it for them, even though the neighborhood didn't want it. The people that live here, let me ask, has anybody here been to New York City? Nope, probably not. Well, if you ever go, yes, you have. What part of New York?
It was a long time ago, so I don't really remember.
Okay, well, you've seen, maybe some of you have, Sex and the City. I used to call Sex in the City, that silly TV series. It was very popular about 10, 15 years ago. That's still in reruns. Sarah Jessica Parker was the star of it. She and her other friends, the other female characters, would meet their dates in front of this museum like every 3rd or 4th episode. Why do I mention that? Because, whoops, I want to get this back to where, now I'm going to have to figure out, how do we get this back to the regular size? Oh, well, all right. That's all right. We have a close-up of it. There we go. Got it. I want you to see the whole thing. The point is that this is a famous building which people who live in that neighborhood now are very proud of. This is part of the meaning, so you should be writing a summary of this. I'll summarize it for you after I tell the story. They opposed the construction. The neighborhood is a wealthy section. It's Midtown Manhattan, Park Avenue area. I mean, this is, you ever played Monopoly? There's a Park Avenue, right, you can buy for lots of money and try to build hotels on it. Anyway, the point is that this is a ritzy or wealthy section of New York, and the neighbors' property values are at the top of the price range. They hated the building when they saw the design of it, the proposed design. They opposed it, and it took like 7 or 8 years to get the permits for it because of that opposition. But Frank Lloyd, why did he win? Now you should start writing this. Wright won this contest, this competition, not a competition with other architects, but with the neighborhood, the opposition. He won over them, by which I mean against them. They never relented. They fought it bitterly right up to the end. He won out. There we go. That's the way to write it. He won out against all the neighborhood's opposition because of who he was. That's the simple way to write it. He was the world's most famous architect. There's no debating during his lifetime. I mean, you might say Michelangelo was equally famous in 500 years ago, but he was the most famous living architect. So his reputation overcame the opposition is what happened. But he had one last fact about the meaning here is he had a way of describing his style of public buildings, including the Marin County Civic Center that you might want to take photos of for extra credit. He called them organic architecture, meaning coming from nature or having to do with living things. So when he claimed this building to kind of assuage the opposition, to try and get them to stop opposing him in public hearings, he'd say, oh, it's an organic building. And finally someone said, what are you talking about, Mr. Wright? This is just a pile of concrete. He said, oh, no, you don't understand what you're looking at. So we'll summarize it this way. He claims that this building was inspired, get this, by what you see in Central Park or any big park in any big city after it rains in warm months of the year, and you step on them or try to avoid stepping on them when you walk through the park. Snails, of course, he was talking about. This is somehow he convinced not everyone, but some of his critics to accept the design by saying, oh, it's a giant concrete snail with that's the shell, and here's the body that joins them, and here's the head. I mean, some people bought it, some didn't. Anyway, that's how he explained it. This is an organic building. It relates to the environment around it, even though it doesn't look like any of the buildings. You can see that. These are traditional straight up and down high rises here. Nothing else like it in that neighborhood. But he claims it was integrated with the environment, the natural environment across the street, Central Park, because of all the snails. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning. We'll wrap it up with a formal analysis, just 3 things. A building, when you write about architecture, whether it's in a paper, if you choose to, you don't have to, but if you choose to write either one or both papers about architecture, I will help you a little bit on the research. I can't write parts of it for you. That would be an unfair advantage, but I can point you in the right directions. Or certainly you will need to write at least 1 slide on each of the 2 exams, the midterm and the final will be an architecture slide, maybe 2. The space of the building or the interior of the building, you need to describe, if not the exact dimensions, like the height, if you can find that, you should mention it. Or if I give it to you in the notes, you should have it in your notes. But this one, I'm not going to give you the dimensions. It's too much detail for tonight. We're almost done here. But I should describe the space inside the building. It's called real space. Buildings have real space. Of course, that's what a building is for. So what is the space like? Here's how to write it. It's 3 main sections. A 6-story gallery. That's what this is, where the artwork is displayed. Ramp, in ramp, R-A-M-P, of course. Ramp, the shape of a ramp. A 6-story ramp style, you could say, or ramp-shaped gallery with a skylight. You see that at the top? That's one section. And then a 2-story connecting section of offices. There are the offices for the security guards, the docents, the museum manager, right? All the offices. 2-story section on the ground, first 2 floors of offices. And then 2 round rooms on one end. One, as you can guess, you ever been to a museum, you know, they always have 2, every museum has 2 rooms inside that aren't for artwork. One's the bookstore and gift shop. That's what this is. And the other is the cafeteria or cafe. So 2 round rooms, one used as a cafe and the other as a gift shop. That's how the space is used inside this. It is dynamic. That's one of the other, we'll do one more element. And that is obvious because you don't see a single straight line unless you count just the very top of this 2nd story here, which actually is an outdoor balcony. Oh, this is the last building. I forgot to say this. You don't have to write it now, but it is part of the meaning. It might be easy to remember. It's the last building ever completed during Wright's lifetime. The last building he designed, I'm sorry, during his lifetime. He lived long enough to see it. 2 weeks later, he died of heart failure. He was in his mid-90s. He lived a long time. So he got to stand out here and look out over Park Avenue and look at the snails across the street in the park. And there's a photo of him standing here on the day the museum opened. Anyway, so this is the last building Wright ever designed during his lifetime that was completed during his lifetime. Marin County Courthouse wasn't begun until after he died, but he did finish it, the design for it. So it is his work. All right, and the last 2 things, well, it's actually 2 more. The color, what kind of color is that? Warm. It's a light yellow, warm color. It's an earth tone. It's not cool. It actually is more yellow than that now. I think they've repainted this. And then the last technique, the last thing for your notes tonight, is the exterior of the building has what's called texture, smooth texture. The textures are the materials of in a building, they're real. Real textures of smooth, and that's just 3 things you should write in your last line of notes for tonight. Smooth concrete, smooth glass, obviously on the windows, and smooth metal in the framing. Those are the 3 real textures here. There are no fake textures. Some Victorian homes, you know, paint wooden mantles on a fireplace to look like marble. That's fake texture. But in most modern buildings, the textures are real. They're the material itself. So one last time to repeat that. Texture is under the formal analysis here. The last thing you should write tonight is on this building, it's real smooth texture of concrete, glass, and metal. Okay, anybody have any questions? Because we're going to end just maybe 2 or 3 minutes early, but I always will stick around every night. I meant to say that as long as people have questions after the slide portion, the lecture itself is done. And of course, you can email me at any point. And like I said, give me 24 hours or so, or 48 hours if it's on the weekend, to get back to you by email. Or if you call me, it's faster. I can return your call if you give me a number to leave a message or to call you back. But anybody have any questions on anything we've covered here? tonight? Let's see. I'm going to try and let's get.
Yeah, got a question.
Sure. Yeah.
For the Laocoon group, I think I
Yep.
pronounced that right.
Mhm.
I've heard that some of these paintings are often, or not, some of these sculptures are often painted. Is that like true, or? were they
Yes,
designed
you're
with-
right. It's a good point you're raising. Absolutely. Laocoon was that was probably not painted, but we don't know for sure. However, there are sculptures in museums all over Europe, especially in Greece and Italy, where they copied. I meant to say that was a Roman copy of a Greek sculpture, but you don't have to add that to your notes unless you want to. On the Laocoon notes, you already have. But that's a detail. It's in the Vatican too, by the way. Anyway, the point is that one we don't know for sure, but we know many other Greek sculptors. In fact, most historians think the majority of Greek sculptures were painted. Bright, vivid colors from life, like, the skin tone of the person they were sculpting and the armor and the clothing and the hair. Yeah, probably. Because if you go to museums in many cities in Europe, you'll see little remnants of the color, the original color still left. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Anything else? Anybody?
I have a personal question.
Sure.
After everything else, if we can continue on for
Okay.
a while.
Yeah, I understand. Sure. All right. So anybody else have any other, factual or lectures or slide related questions? Okay, because here's what I can do. I don't know how to selectively mute people. I do know how to do mute all or unmute. So for anyone that wants to ask that kind of question, I want to be, conscientious and sensitive, whatever. If it's something really personal, then at this point, I might say I'll wait a few minutes, but I can't wait too long to see how many people sign off. But let me do this. Do you mind asking that question, that person that just spoke up? Now, if no one else has does anyone have any other questions at all about the class or what we covered tonight? No? Okay. All right, then. Do you feel like asking a question? I'll answer it right now if you can.
I think there is someone else trying to ask a question.
Yes, please. Oh, well, they need to speak up because I didn't mute anybody.
I just
Hello?
want to know if we have anything due before the next lecture besides the mini bios.
Thank you. That's a good question. Just the reading, one chapter each. I know it's two introductory chapters in Gill. Those chapters are very short, like 10 or 15 pages with illustrations in the Gill Critices. And then one chapter, the one on prehistoric art in Stockstead. And that isn't very long either. That's it. Reading is about all you have to do between classes until we get to where it's near time for the the papers, and then you want to start doing research, and I can answer all your questions about that. Those
are both at the beginning of like the books in both of them.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Those are both like at the beginning chapters like of each book.
Yes, I'll go ahead and tell you what they are. All right, for next week, the reading is Chapter 1 in Stockstead on prehistoric art in Europe. Okay, that's the title, at least it always was in every edition. I don't have the latest edition of Stockstead, but they don't change the titles very often. So again, chapter 1, it definitely is the first chapter, and the title should be Prehistoric Art in Europe. And then the other thing is chapters 1, 2. Well, actually, this week you were supposed to read 1 and 2, but if you didn't, then just go ahead and read 3 and 4 in Gill, The Critic Sees. Those are really easy to read, though, I can tell you. They're not technical jargon. You don't have to take notes on neither the Stockstead. I think you maybe, I don't know if you heard me at the beginning or you joined late or something, but you don't have to take notes from Stockstead. The test is going to be based on the lecture notes. And I will post these lectures like this one, for instance, for sure, during the next 48 hours. So by Friday, anyway, certainly by Friday of each week after the lecture's done, you can go on YouTube, and I'll send an email and remind everyone of this, not every week, but the first 2 or 3, that they are under the category Mark Wilson's SRJC, right? Short for Santa Rosa JC, Art History lectures, and then you look for the topic. And this tonight, you don't need to do that. You've heard it. You've all been here. But anyone who misses one then looks for the topic that they missed, and you'll see them there. They come up, and they're the exact lecture we just recording. In fact, I got to remember to turn off the recording. So in other words, all you have to do if you sat through the lecture is look at the syllabus and see what chapters to read in Stockstead and Gill. That's it for the next week. Okay. All right. Anybody else have a question?
I have a quick question about the mini bios. Would you prefer them to be just written out in the email, or would you want them in a document?
Either way is fine. Either way,
Okay.
that's easier for you guys. Yeah. And just for me, it's easier for that purpose to have them in my AOL email. You have that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I just haven't, it's faster for me to get them and download them. And then I will enter you as being registered and attending the first class, and you're all set. I won't have to do that again. I'm not going to take roll, 2-3 weeks in a row or anything like that. All right. Anything else?
Okay, thank you.
All right. There was one more person that I thought had a more personal question. Is that right? Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So my question was, I don't have your class in my Canvas.
I don't
that?
I don't use Canvas. I've been answering people who email me about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I don't have that capacity. It's if you want to know, I'll be honest with you. It was a whole nother skill set that I barely had time to learn Zoom. It took weeks because I had no one to teach me, and unless I wanted to drive all the way up to Santa Rosa for remote seminars. And when they had them here, I didn't have Zoom. I'd have them here. I meant when they were online, that doesn't work for me. So I just spent like the whole summer barely becoming competent, just barely functional. And that was more important. And when I called, I'm not criticizing, but when I called the Canvas helpline to see if someone could help me through it that way, while I sat at my laptop, and I couldn't get anybody. They were swamped. They were overwhelmed. It's not their fault. There's too many people all over the country because Canvas, isn't just for Santa Rosa or even California colleges. So I figured I'll get up to speed on Canvas later. So all we're doing is when you submit, this will be in every each assignment, you'll see the instructions. I'll repeat them verbally as well before the due date. You're just going to submit them as a PDF attachment to my email. And I'll tell you which email, probably the campus email. That's how I did it in the spring after we shut down, and it worked fine. And I could then forward them. The ones I don't grade, I send to my readers, and then I read them to make sure they did, so I look at every one. And so that worked beautifully. So I just don't use Canvas. You don't have to think about it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, all right. Hope I'll see all of you, and maybe a few that weren't here tonight. Next week, do make sure you email me if you still need extra, copies or attachments of the handouts, and try to get the text if you don't have it, and do the reading. See you all next week. Take care. Okay. Good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for being a great class.
Thank you.
And definitely check your emails, please. Make sure I have the right email attached.
Yeah. Okay. You don't need me to repeat it, right?
No, and I attached your original school one just in case I got that wrong.
Okay. I can't tell. You are asking me to repeat it?
Sure. Yeah.
Mark, yeah, MARKW, 5 letters, at AOL.com. There we go. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. There we go. Signing off.